Chapter 567. Ren Baqin wanted to go back to his courtyard and have a good sleep. However, the moment he stepped into the palace, he was summoned by the Empress to attend a court meeting. For a full 4 hours, Ren Baqin explained the situation in Tianjin Basin as well as some of the arrangements. Then he listened to the reports of the other people and almost fell asleep. Only then did he drag his exhausted body back to the courtyard. As soon as he entered, he saw 2 big fellows with dark circles opening their bloody mouths and pouncing toward him. "Oh, you still remember me?" Ren Baqin laughed heartily as he lifted Gun above his head and rubbed his face against its furry body. A foul smell stained his face. After all, even though these 2 little fellows weren't hungry, they wouldn't be bathed every day. He tossed Gun aside, rubbed Tiantian's head, and planned to return to the house. In the end, Gun's 4 paws hugged each of his legs. It seemed like the 2 little chaps missed him a lot. After shaking off the 2 little fellows with great difficulty, Ren Baqin went back to his room to take a look. After he left, someone cleaned the room every day and it was very clean. He then fell asleep on his bed. On the other hand, after the court session was over, Lian Liang from the Department of the Army strolled toward the area where the people from Tianjin Basin had just settled down after entering the city. Qin Chuan saw him greeting people as soon as he left the palace, but he just smiled. His identity wasn't convenient, and Lian Liang's plan was very much in line with his intentions. To put it bluntly, Tianjin Basin had been in chaos for so many years. Even though they had surrendered, the people from the Ministry of War were the most displeased with them. They had to be beaten up first before anything else. Before Ren Baqin returned, he had contacted them through the radio station and built a brick and tile hut near the city wall to serve as a place for the people from Tianjin Basin to stay. In other words, it was a street that was completely sealed off and surrounded by high walls. There was only one entrance and exit, and there were guards stationed there. This was to prevent people from finding trouble with them. After all, Tianjin Basin had been restless for so many years and had provoked the Empress. Even though these people had returned here with the Empress, there were still many people who would find trouble with them. Because of this, he had specially arranged for people from the Public Order Division to patrol the vicinity every day to prevent any trouble from happening. However, the Public Order Division could stop ordinary people, but they could not stop Lian Liang from the military division. Not only did they not stop him, but they also stood far away with an expression as if they were watching a good show. Lian Liang brought his men to the end of the street, and placed the broadsword in his hand that was exactly the same as Qin Chuan's on the ground and roared, "All of you come out." Following this shout, the commoners of Tianjin Basin who had just been settled here from afar immediately trembled in fear. Qingyun's sword's heart skipped a beat. He jumped out of the courtyard and landed at the intersection of the street. He cupped his hands towards Lian Liang and said, "Sir, what can I do for you?" Although he had already guessed that there would be trouble, he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Although he didn't know who the person in front of him was, he felt a chill in his heart when he saw the people from the Public Order Bureau watching from afar. "Cut the crap. I'm here to fight. You have been causing trouble for so many years. Now that you have come to Lan City in my territory, let me see where you get your guts from." "Sir." Qingyun's sword's mind was racing. How should he resolve this matter? On one hand, he could swallow the insult and humiliation. However, he and his men had just arrived and someone had already come knocking on their door. If he swallowed the insult and humiliation, he was afraid that he would be looked down upon, and his days in the future would be even more difficult. However, if he were to fight with the other party, he was afraid that he would anger the other party and the others, and there would be endless trouble in the future. Come. Let me beat you up first. I'll let you see how sharp my broadsword is." Lian Liang didn't care what Qingyun's sword was thinking and slashed at him. "Sir, you are so heroic." The attendants behind him cheered and laughed at the same time. If Ren Baqin or Tong Jinya were here and heard this, they would be overjoyed. Indeed, if the upper beam isn't straight, the lower beam will be crooked. The words that Minister of War Qin Chuan always said were used by Lian Liang just like that. Qingyun's sword was startled. He pointed with his sword, and the long sword on his back soared into the sky with a clang. It transformed into a ray of white light and pierced toward Lian Liang. Lian Liang swung his broadsword horizontally and deflected the sword. Then he slashed again and again with his broadsword. Each slash was powerful, heavy, and extremely fast. In just 6 or 7 slashes, there was a loud bang at the end of the street. The pillars on both sides of the street were chopped down, and the signboards fell to the ground. Qingyun's sword was also forced to retreat step by step under the ferocious slashes of the broadsword. Qingyun's sword changed his sword technique, and the long sword in the air split into 7. Like swimming fish, they circled toward Lian Liang. Is this all you've got? That's all you've got, Lian Liang said contemptuously. Then he swept his broadsword around his body, causing a gale to blow across the entire street. Clang clang clang. After a series of collisions, the 6 long swords in the air were smashed into pieces. The last one rolled a few times in the air and fell back onto Qingyun's sword's head. Lian Liang took a deep breath and then let out a beast-like roar. The muscles on his body bulged. His body leaped more than 10 meters and slashed at Qingyun's sword with his broadsword. It felt like a tiger pouncing on a sheep and was unstoppable. The air stirred along with the broadsword in his hand. Clang. The long sword in the air was only blocked for a moment before it was sent flying. Qingyun's sword retreated continuously from the corner of the street all the way to the middle of the street. His forehead was dripping with sweat. This aboriginal official of unknown origin actually had such terrifying strength. He wasn't much weaker than the god of massacre, Shi Huanya. Previously, when he exchanged blows with Shi Huanya, his vitality had been greatly damaged. Now he couldn't use that sword technique anymore. However, the other party didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. It was as if the other party wouldn't stop until he killed Qingyun's sword. Noisy. At this moment, a voice came from a nearby courtyard. A short black rod flew out from the courtyard and collided with Lian Liang's broadsword. This caused Lian Liang's broadsword to pause, and the aura that he had accumulated to the peak was knocked down. Instead of being shocked, Lian Liang was delighted. He laughed and said, "There's actually an expert here? However, I don't care what kind of expert you are. Take a blow from me first." After he finished speaking, the long sword dashed toward the courtyard like a dragon. "You've disturbed my sleep." An old man with white hair and beard, who looked like a beggar, appeared outside the courtyard. The short rod in his hand pointed at Lian Liang's dragon-like broadsword. Clang. The long sword in Lian Liang's hand exploded. Following which, the short rod pointed at his chest and sent him flying, crashing into a courtyard. "You guys can continue fighting. Don't make a fuss and disturb my sleep." Li Fu smashed Lian Liang's long sword with one strike and sent Lian Liang flying. Only then did he turn around and return to the courtyard. "Thank you, senior, for your help." Qingyun's sword cupped his fists in gratitude. "What has it got to do with me? It's just that he was shouting so loudly that he disturbed my sleep." Li Fu's voice came from the courtyard. "Sir." Lian Liang's guard hurriedly ran over and found Lian Liang in a pile of rubble. He was vomiting blood while holding the hilt of his broadsword. His expression was as if his heart was being pierced by a knife. "My broadsword. If you continue to make noise, I won't hit your broadsword. I will hit your balls." Li Fu's voice came from afar, which made Lian Liang go crazy. If it was anyone else who came looking for trouble but ended up hitting an iron wall, they would definitely feel ashamed and resentful. However, Lian Liang didn't care. In any case, he was used to being beaten up by Qin Xuan. However, the problem was his broadsword. 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 He had contributed all his assets to House Yunyan. The most valuable thing he had was this broadsword. This fight had cost him all his assets. Chapter 568. Ren Baqin estimated that he would arrive at the palace banquet in the evening. Many people were already there. Generally, the lower the position, the earlier they arrived. This was the case even in this world. Principal Ren. Many court officials greeted him. If Ren Baqin was just a small character that the Empress took a fancy to as if he had won the lottery back then, things were different now. Not to mention his performance in the war with Great Xia, the radio station's instant communication played a great role in this technologically backward world. The border and the imperial court could communicate with each other in a timely manner every day. This was a great information advantage that allowed Dayo to respond to any situation as quickly as possible. It allowed them to dispatch reinforcements and assign troops more accurately. Of course, in the eyes of the ordinary officials, the most important thing was the salt works in the mountains. If the salt route had been cut off previously, Dayo would have been anxious. They would have rushed to attack, engaged in bitter battles and set up ambushes. However, the existence of the salt works gave Dayo more room to maneuver strategically. Although they didn't understand this term, it didn't mean that they didn't understand it. As a result, Ren Baqin became a strange but very capable person in the eyes of many officials. He was strange because he was different from the aboriginals. His fighting strength was completely weak. He was capable because he came up with many things that had great effects and effects. Ren Baqin found his seat and sat with a few officials from the Ministry of Works. "How's the farming going recently?" Ren Baqin asked Gui Hong. In fact, when he came back, he saw the sweet potato vines and pumpkins in the fields far away from Lan City and felt that they should be doing well. Very good, very good. Gui Hong immediately smiled when he heard the question. Those pumpkins and sweet potatoes had already been harvested for 2 seasons and were all used as seeds to promote them throughout Dayo. These products were effective quickly, had high yields and tasted good. Although they weren't as easy to exchange for meat or sell in the market as vegetables, they had a large yield and could fill one's stomach. As a result, the promotion went smoothly. Sir Rin, do you have any new crops on hand? Gui Hong rarely saw Rin Baqin. His mind was filled with his old business, so he immediately changed the topic to new crops. If there is a suitable one, I will send it to Lord Gu. Rin Baqin thought for a while. In fact, there were many crops on Earth that could not be found in this world. However, at present what Dayo needed the most were crops with high yields that could fill their stomachs. Furthermore, these crops had to be compatible with Dayo's tropical mountainous climate. Therefore, there wasn't much room for choice. After chatting with Feng Ho for a while, Rin Baqin heard a maniacal laughter coming from the entrance of the hall. It sounded like the voice of Tong Jinya. Following that, Qin Chuan angrily scolded, "Old man, if you don't shut up, this old man will let you have a taste of the sharpness of this old man's blade." "Ah. Old man, why don't you pull out your knife for me to see? Even if I stretch out my neck for you to chop, you won't be able to do it." Tong Jinya yelled crazily as he spoke. Following that, the sound of fists and kicks could be heard from outside. The two of them had started fighting outside the hall. Many people who were nearby ran out to watch the show. They were just a bunch of onlookers who didn't mind the matter getting bigger. Even though the two of them were rank 3 officials, if the two of them were to fight, there wouldn't be anyone to stop them. The surrounding people were all munching on melon seeds, peanuts and other nuts to watch the show. When Feng Ho Gui Hong, who was beside Rin Baqin, heard that there was a fight outside, he dragged Rin Baqin out excitedly to watch the show with a smirk on his face. "What's going on?" Rin Baqin knew that something was up when he saw their expressions. "Is there a super expert among those abandoned people?" Feng Ho remembered that Rin Baqin definitely knew about those people and quickly asked, "Who provoked them?" Rin Baqin immediately became spirited. It was indeed a super expert who was at least as tall as a 30-story building. Yesterday, Lian Liang wanted to give them a good beating. In the end, his weapon was broken and he suffered some minor injuries. When Sir Qin found out about this, he shouted, "Let me show you how sharp my blade is," and tried to test that person's trick. In the end, his weapon was also broken and his balls were beaten. Feng Ho laughed heartily. Rin Baqin immediately looked like he was in pain. This Qin Chuan was really unlucky to bump into an iron plate. He didn't even try to find out about the other party's background. Li Fu's identity wasn't a secret. It could only be said that the aboriginals were used to being overbearing. After all, the big shots in the imperial court were all Cardinal Heaven experts. They didn't care about who their opponent was and only cared about where their opponent was. When everyone arrived at the entrance of the main hall, they heard cheers from both sides. Rin Baqin looked up and saw Tong Jinya's 13 consecutive groin kicks. One kick after another, his feet never left his lower body. One had to know that Tong Jinya used to use the 13 consecutive, Black Tiger Steals Heart, technique. Qin Chuan was jumping around like a little girl. His legs were kicked a few times and he looked like he was going crazy. "Sir Rin, who was that person yesterday? It seems like Sir Qin is in a lot of pain." Feng Ho asked with a smile. He was also a little curious. Both Rin Liang and Qin Chuan weren't weak, but they couldn't even last a few moves against the other party. Li Fu. Never heard of him? Feng Ho thought for a while and shook his head. The number 1 expert in the world, Li Fu. Rin Baqin said unhurriedly. Li Fu had always been looking for the stairway to heaven and rarely appeared. Most people only knew that he was the number 1 expert in the world, but not many people knew of his name. In addition, this name was a little too down-to-earth and sounded like a villager from the mountains. Most people wouldn't be able to recall this name. Huh. Feng Ho turned his head in shock. Why was Li Fu here? A few people with good hearing were also surprised. He isn't from Tianjing Basin and met him on the road. He has some matters to attend to and is staying in Lan City for a period of time. Don't provoke him for no reason. Feng Ho continued to look surprised. In any case, that's what happened. Rin Baqin spread his hands. The two of them fought for a long time. Qin Chuan's legs weren't convenient, so he was at a disadvantage. He was so angry that his head was about to explode. On the other hand, Tong Jinya couldn't stop laughing. There weren't many opportunities for him to take advantage of others. Only when great elder Shi Qing arrived did the two of them finally calm down. Following the arrival of the Empress, the banquet began. However, today's banquet was a little different from the previous ones. In the middle of the banquet, there was a dance performed by more than 10 young ladies from Tianjin Basin. It was the same dance that Ren Baqin saw at the Golden Ring residence. The young ladies were carefully selected and had beautiful looks. Even though they weren't heavenly beauties, they were still quite charming. This was the first time that the citizens of Tianjin Basin made an appearance. The next day, Ren Baqin heard the news that Tong Jingye went to challenge Li Fu, got his weapon broken, and got his balls kicked. Ren Baqin was a little stunned when he heard the news. He had already revealed Li Fu's identity, so Feng Ho must have already told him. Could it be that Feng Ho still wanted to seek revenge for Qin Chuan? Could it be that the two of them had some sort of romantic relationship? Next, Feng Ho was kicked in the balls by Li Fu, followed by the Minister of Justice, Shi Zhong, the head of the Public Security Bureau, by Shi Ying, and the head of the Department of Inspection, Tai Yin. Ren Baqin was completely confused. Towards the end, he realized that these people clearly wanted to see the level of the world's most powerful expert. In any case, Li Fu had never been heavy-handed. To these boorish men, the attraction of the world's most powerful expert wasn't much different from the attraction of the world's most beautiful woman. After more than 10 challenges, Li Fu also received the title of the crazy egg-kicking devil. The people inside, listen up. Come out and see if my saber is sharp or not. Ren Baqin heard Qin Chuan's insolent voice when he walked to the corner of Jing Street. He saw Qin Chuan holding a steel saber from an unknown person and making a big fuss outside Li Fu's courtyard. A few minutes later, Li Fu came out of the courtyard with a crazed look on his face. He smashed Qin Chuan's steel saber with his rod and kicked his balls before leaving speechlessly. Chapter 569. Ren, are these barbarians sick? Li Fu was furious and irritated when he saw Ren Baqin. He had been tormented miserably for the past 2 days. No matter what, they were still a group of cardinal heaven experts. It seemed like he could easily defeat them with 2 or 3 moves, but it took a lot of effort. Furthermore, Li Fu didn't like fighting at all. All he could think about was finding the stairway to heaven, and fighting was just a last resort. However, he didn't expect that after his first fight, this group of people would come endlessly. There would be people challenging him every day, morning, afternoon, night, whether it was day or night. These bastards would come whenever they wanted to. If he didn't agree, they would quarrel endlessly outside. The loud voices of the aboriginals had made him nervous for several days. If it weren't for the hot air balloon and rocket that Ren Baqin had promised him, he would have knocked them over and run away. Ren Baqin was a little speechless. Although he knew that Li Fu was a good person, he didn't expect him to be this good. He really didn't know how he became the #1 expert in the world. Now, it was as if he was being bullied by those old fools. In fact, although he had always been the one kicking people's testicles, it seemed like he was the one being kicked now. You are the #1 expert in the world and you are still alive. What a great opportunity it is to see the #1 expert in the world in the flesh. Besides, who doesn't worship their idol? Even though they all have high statuses, seeing the #1 expert in the world is like seeing a young idol. Isn't this exciting? In addition, I want you to give them some pointers. Ren Baqin's words were half true and half false. Before coming here, he was really afraid that Li Fu would be anxious, so he came to take a look. However, based on the current situation, it wouldn't be a problem even if they struggled for a while. To be able to see Li Fu in action, even if it was just a few moves, was already very beneficial. Most importantly, there were many people. Almost all the people from secondary class, rank 3 and above, had been here once and were planning to come a second time. It was said that even the Minister of Revenue, Tu Wan, was tempted. Now, Li Fu's place was like a famous tourist attraction. Every day one could see all kinds of big shots in the court. Even the Jing tribe people who had just moved here were a little speechless. Black Bamboo Academy will start classes the day after tomorrow. Senior, if you have nothing to do, you can go and listen to the classes. You can also find some peace and quiet, Ren Baqin said after thinking for a while. Not interested. Just finish what you promised me as soon as possible. Li Fu waved his hand, not minding at all. He was just a little annoyed by those fellows who disturbed his peace. Seeing this, Ren Baqin didn't say much. He laughed and bade farewell. In the end, as soon as he left the courtyard, he was stopped by someone. Sir Ren, what are your arrangements for me? You can't possibly let me stay here without any status, right? Ning Kaichen had a look of hidden bitterness on his face. Those who didn't know would think that Ren Baqin had done something to him. Rinpoche looked at the gossipy expressions on the faces of the newly assigned guards. He didn't need to ask to know what they were thinking. Then he looked at Ning Kaichen with a pair of bright and piercing eyes. If you have the guts, say it in front of the Empress. If she doesn't plaster you to the wall, consider it my loss. Rinpoche dismissed Ning Kaichen with a few words. Recently there really weren't any positions suitable for him. After all, with his status there were many things that he couldn't do. Furthermore, there were already people who could do what he could. However, he really couldn't just leave a sword master here and ignore him. After a few more days, Ning Kaichen definitely wouldn't be able to stay here anymore. Rinpoche pondered about where to place Ning Kaichen as he walked back. In the end he was stopped halfway. Sir Rin, please come with me and say a few words. A middle-aged man and two young men came down from a carriage by the side of the road and called out to Rinpoche. Rinpoche sized them up and was slightly puzzled. Are you from the Yun Nation? The people of the Yun Nation looked similar to the people of Great Xia. However, they had always been known for their luxury and exquisite clothing. As a result, when Rinpoche saw these three men in exquisite embroidered clothes, he immediately guessed their identities. Sir, my surname is Zhang and I have met you once before. Today, I'm looking for you because I have an important matter to discuss with you. Sir, please come with me and let me say a few words. I have already prepared some food and wine in the restaurant next door. Rinpoche looked at this man carefully and then at the two young men behind him. He didn't have any impression of them. However, he really wanted to hear what they had to say. Rinpoche nodded to the people beside him. Zuolung and the others immediately went around the inn and confirmed that there were no problems before going downstairs to report to Rinpoche. It wasn't that he was being too careful. Anyone who had experienced a few assassinations in a year would be this careful. The two young men behind him lowered their heads and had a strange look on their faces. It wasn't clear whether it was contempt or something else, but they were careful not to let others notice. Rinpoche walked upstairs under the escort of the guards and found a seat by the window to sit down. Under the watchful eyes of the guards, the three of them carefully sat opposite Rinpoche. Sir Rin, the last time I saw you was a year ago. I think you already don't remember me. Rinpoche thought about it. A year ago at this time, he should have just arrived in Dayo and was assigned by the Empress to be the Honglu deputy, in charge of receiving guests from various countries. Did the few of you attend Her Majesty's birthday celebration last year? Rinpoche suddenly realized. At that time he really couldn't remember many of them. Ning Kaichen, the seventh prince of Great Xia, and that kidney-deficient young master who vomited blood every time he made a move. These were the only people he could remember. He couldn't even remember the name and appearance of that young master from the Lien family whom he killed at that time, let alone the others. That's right. The middle-aged man nodded and smiled. Following which he said, My surname is Zhang Junzheng. These are my two nephews Zhang Hechi and Zhang Heju. Greetings, Sir Ren. Just as Sir Ren thought, we are from the Yun Nation. As the middle-aged man spoke, he carefully sized up Rinpoche and sighed deeply in his heart. At this time last year, this person in front of him was still a Honglu deputy in name. Not long after, he became the husband of Qi Zixiao. At that time, he didn't take Qi Zixiao seriously. After all, at that time, he didn't display any outstanding qualities. In everyone's hearts, he was just lucky to be chosen by Qi Zixiao. However, this luck could fall to the bottom at any time because of a slight change in Qi Zixiao's mind. In the eyes of many people, perhaps that was normal. After all, what kind of person was Qi Zixiao? He was an ordinary person with no talent and good luck. Even if Qi Zixiao liked him because of his flattery, how long could he last? Therefore, even though he and the others had been trying to build a relationship with Dayo for the past year, they didn't consider this person in front of them. This was the reason why. However, after a year, unexpectedly, this person's position had become more and more stable. This could be seen just from the attitude of the people in the imperial court toward him. Furthermore, there were rumors among the people that he played a great role in the war against Great Xia in the north. Furthermore, he produced salt in the mountains and recently went to Tianjin Basin with the Empress. Although he didn't know what he did, nearly 2,000 people from Tianjin Basin came to Lan City. He also had a few experts from the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation by his side as guards. Now, he had no choice but to put down his pride and re-evaluate this person and beg him for help. Even Rinpoche, who had always boasted of his superior foresight, had to admit that he had really misjudged this time. Rinpoche's brain spun and finally felt that these three people in front of him were somewhat familiar. He then waited for them to speak and see what they wanted to say. They couldn't possibly be trying to persuade the Empress to give the Yun Nation a way out through him, right? In history, There was no lack of cases of losing a direct confrontation and then bribing the opposing party's high-ranking officials to cause trouble in their own backyard. However, if they had this intention, they could be directly dragged down and beheaded. Chapter 570. Rinpoche wasn't in a hurry to reply. Instead, he picked up the teacup and smelled it before putting it back on the table. After taking a closer look at the three of them, he asked curiously, "You guys aren't ordinary people in the Yun Nation, right? Although the Narita Zhang family isn't a big family, they do have some reputation." Zhang Junjing was a little proud. In fact, not only did the Zhang family have a small reputation, but it was also quite famous. Many people in the Yun Nation had always thought that controlling a city was the foundation of a family. However, although the Zhang clan did not control a city, the clan that controlled the city had changed several times over the past hundreds of years, but the Zhang clan had never fallen, and every generation had a talent. It wasn't that the Zhang family didn't have the opportunity to control the city, but they gave up every time. According to the words of an elder of the Zhang clan, water had no form and there was no way to attack it. From the Zhang clan's point of view, it might seem like they had a foothold in a city, but in reality they were bound to it. Therefore, apart from being a family that did not attract much attention on the surface, most of the Zhang family members were scattered throughout various industries. The Narita Zhang family had always been a general name. On the surface, it looked like a plate of loose sand distributed in various industries. On the surface they might not seem to be related, but at the root of it they both came from the Narita Zhang family. Even if their enemies wanted to harm them, it would be difficult for them to do so. Zhang Juanjing's two nephews had been running into walls in Lan City for a year, and the war between Dayo and the Yun Nation was in full swing. In his opinion, it was impossible for the Yun Nation to win this war, so time was of the essence. In order to gain Rinpoche's attention, he briefly shared some information that wasn't easily known to others. Rinpoche was astonished by what he said. He didn't expect there to be such an aristocratic family in this world. According to Rinpoche's understanding of the Zhang family from Earth, it was similar to the Huizhou merchants. It was a general term of address, but it was still linked by bloodline. Why would you want to seek refuge with Dayo? Rinpoche asked with great interest. Other people avoided the aboriginals, but the Zhang family took the initiative to approach them. This piqued his interest. The rising cloud nation's monarch is young and frivolous, and all the important matters in the court are handled by Prime Minister Zheng Xingmian. Zheng Xingmian was obstinate, self-opinionated, and ambitious. Currently, the people in the imperial court were either trying to curry favor with him, or they were sent to prison, or they were resigning and returning home. In a few more years, the name of the country's monarch would probably change. If that was all, it would be fine. However, Zheng Xingmian was greedy and lustful. He had great ambition but little talent. To tell you the truth, even in the face of a war with your country, the imperial court is still rejecting dissidents. This is evident. What does that have to do with you? Why don't you seek refuge with him? Rinpoche asked. No matter what the imperial court did, a clan like the Zhang clan should have a way to deal with it. He didn't believe that he would run over to the aboriginals just because he couldn't stand the sight of the demons and monsters in the imperial court. It's a long story. Zheng Xingmian has great ambitions but little talent. He is not a good person. He has always had enmity with our Zhang family, and he knows a lot about our Zhang family. Although everything is fine now, the safety of the thousands of people in my Zhang family cannot be placed on this, so I have no choice but to do this. When Rinpoche heard this, he understood most of it. The Zhang family was afraid that Zheng Xingmian would attack them, so they were looking for a way out. Ordinary people might not know much about the Zhang family, but the Zhang family had been in the Yun Nation for hundreds of years. They had existed even before the founding of the Yun Nation, so there were still people who knew about their roots. It was impossible for those large clans to not know anything about the Zhang family, but they just didn't fully understand them. Zheng Xingmian probably knew a lot about the Zhang family. There was a saying that went, "The person who understands you the most is your enemy." However, the Zhang family seemed to be overthinking things. Whether it was the Yun Nation or Zheng Xingmian, they were probably going to vanish into thin air. What can you do? Rinpoche asked unhurriedly. My Zhang family is involved in all walks of life, which is what your country lacks the most. I'm sure that the Zhang family will be of some use to you. Zhang Junjing laughed. He was very confident in the strength of the Zhang family. What you know, I know as well. I know everything that you don't. Rinpoche laughed nonchalantly with a hint of playfulness in his tone. Sir, no one is omnipotent. Zhang Junjing laughed and suddenly felt a little strange. This person's achievements over the past year and the establishment of the Black Bamboo Academy shouldn't be an ignorant person. How could he dare to say such a thing? One had to know that being involved in all walks of life was the foundation of the Jiang family's survival and also the source of their confidence. As long as someone from the Jiang family was still alive, they would be able to find a way out no matter where they were. Indeed, no one is omnipotent. However, I should be omnipotent to you, Rinpoche said bluntly. The things of the Jiang family were very important to others and even more important to the previous Dayo. However, with Rinpoche around, those things were nothing. He could obtain more advanced and scientific manufacturing techniques, industrial systems, and various management methods than the Jiang family. Although it might not necessarily be in line with the situation in this world, Rinpoche believed that he could completely change Dayo as long as he was given time. The Jiang family was naturally useful, but it wasn't as useful as they thought. The biggest use for Rinpoche was to save time. Therefore these people could be used, but he still had to suppress them. After hearing Rinpoche's words, Zhang Junjing looked slightly unhappy. The two young men behind him looked at Rinpoche with disdain. No matter who it was that was looked down upon, they wouldn't be able to stay calm. Not to mention a family like the Zhang family. The person in front of them was directly labeled as frivolous, shallow, and didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. The Zhang family is indeed looking for a way out, but it's not just Dayo. It's just that Great Xia is deeply rooted in all aspects. If the Zhang family were to move there, it would easily cause a backlash from the local forces. Therefore, Zhang Junjing, who had the best foresight in the family, was inclined to move a portion of the family to Dayo. However, they had already hit a brick wall previously. If this person was such a shallow person, then there was no need for him to come to Dayo. Rinpoche looked at the expressions of the three people and realized that it was completely within his expectations. I have already made salt. I don't know if you have heard of glass cups and mirrors? I can also make your pancreas and I can make it even better. I call it not a perfumed soap. I can also make wine and the taste is better than yours and the taste is stronger. Spices? Soy sauce? Soy sauce? I can do all of these. Essence? I can also do this. Wrought iron? Forging weapons? I can also do all of these and they are more advanced than yours. I know a little about farming equipment and even how to farm. Clothes? Textiles? I can do all of these. In addition to history, I can also do mathematics, investigation, military strategy, poetry, and local governance. What else do you know? Tell me. Let me see if there's anything I don't know. Rinpoche chuckled and spoke with great confidence. Zhuoleng and the others who were following him were speechless and didn't know if it was true or not. After all, they had only followed Rinpoche for a short period of time. They believed that Rinpoche knew the art of war and knew how to govern a country. After all, some of the things that Rinpoche did vaguely had the shadow of the art of war. The rearguard commandery was also formulated by Rinpoche. From recruitment to promotion, confidentiality, and rewards and punishments, the regulations were quite comprehensive. Ordinary people couldn't do it at all. Zhuoleng and the others also deeply believed that Rinpoche was proficient in this area. As for other aspects, they weren't sure. However, after hearing what he said, they felt that it was a little exaggerated. Needless to say, the three people from the Zhang family didn't believe it at first. Towards the end, their expressions became very strange, as if they were looking at a lunatic talking in his sleep. In any industry, a person might not be able to reach the peak in his lifetime. Do you know all of them? Chapter 571. In that case, it seems that Dayo isn't a place for the Zhang family. Sorry for disturbing you today. We will take our leave now, Zhang Junjing said faintly as he suppressed the anger in his heart. He originally thought that the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy was a wise person since he was able to secure his position in such a short period of time and establish an academy. Now he only felt that he was an arrogant person. It was obvious that he wasn't an aboriginal. Perhaps he had learned some things from somewhere else, or perhaps he had developed this kind of arrogance after interacting with the aboriginals because of their stupidity. Therefore he was an arrogant person. Such a person wasn't a good choice. No hurry. Seeing that the three of them were about to get up, Rinpoche gestured with his hand, and the guards immediately pressed them down on the chairs. Among the three of them, only Zhang Junjing was an earth wheel expert. The other two were man wheel experts, so they naturally didn't have the strength to resist the palace guards. Zhang Junjing was even angrier. Since you have already said so, why can't we leave? Sir Ren, what other instructions do you have? Since we are useless to Sir Ren and Dayo, why not let us leave? Zhang Juanjing's voice was slightly cold. It's not that the Zhang family can't establish a foothold in Deyo, but your expectations are too high. To those who have never seen brass, brass can naturally be sold as gold, but not to me. If I did so, I would become a great laughingstock. If the Zhang family can live a stable life in Deyo, it won't be a problem. It can even be like how you live in the Yun nation, Ren Baqin said with a smile. Ren Baqin said with a smile. He already knew what the Zhang family was thinking after listening to the beginning. He needed some manpower, but he didn't want them to think too highly of themselves. Since Sir Ren is here, why do you need us? No, although I can do everything, I'm just one person with limited energy. I still need some manpower. You can also learn something from me as the foundation of the Zhang family, Ren Baqin said without any trace of politeness. Zhang Junjing almost laughed when he heard this. I wonder what Sir Ren can teach the Zhang family? Zhang Junjing emphasized the word, teach. As for Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju behind him, they were not as calm as he was. If it weren't for the guards holding them down, they would have already jumped up. But even so, a layer of ice still scraped off his face. In that case, why don't we take a gamble? You can choose 3, 5, or 7 industries or manufacturing methods to compete. As long as I lose one, it will be considered my loss. I will introduce you to His Majesty and guarantee that His Majesty will not behead you. How about that? When Zhang Junjing heard what Ren Baqin said, he wasn't happy. Instead, he was angry. The other party was simply too arrogant, allowing him to choose as many as he wanted to compete, and if he lost even one, it would be considered his loss? What kind of courage did he need to say that? Did they really think that there was no one in the Zhang clan? One had to know that the Zhang family's roots were not in the imperial court, nor were they in any line of business. Instead, the Zhang family's shadow could be seen in most of the hundreds of lines of business in the Yun nation. Furthermore, the Zhang family had grasped the core of the business. It can be said that in the Yun nation, except for a very small number of things that are in the hands of certain families, there is nothing that the Zhang family doesn't touch. Although this kind of Zhang family wasn't widely known in the outside world, it was only because the Zhang family had always followed this method to continue the family line. Even if they encountered a great disaster, there would still be a day when they would rise again. However, this didn't mean that the Zhang family didn't have the strength. Sir Ren, since you have put it this way, I would be guilty if I were to decline. There's no need for too many, just 3. Zhang Junjing sneered. He couldn't even be bothered to ask what the other party's conditions were if he lost. Don't you want to challenge a few more? Is 3 enough? Ren Baqin naturally didn't care. Whether it was 3 or 30, it didn't make any difference to him. 3 is enough, Zhang Junjing said proudly. If he couldn't beat this person in front of him in 3 categories, then the Zhang family would be too incompetent. Furthermore, he was certain that he would win. As long as you think it's enough. If you lose, you will have to move the Zhang family over to Deyo to assist me and learn well. If you want to run away, you should know about the 9 pavilions, Ren Baqin said unhurriedly. The Zhang family naturally won't do such a thing. Keeping our word is the foundation of the Zhang family, Zhang Junjing said. Furthermore, we won't lose. Zhang Junjing added resolutely. It's best to have confidence. Ren Baqin smiled and didn't say it out loud. He wanted to say that ignorance limited their imagination. The time will be set in 1 month. As for what the bet is, I will inform you when the time comes, Zhang Junjing said. In the end, he was still a little cautious. He was afraid that the aboriginals would capture craftsmen from the Yun nation if he told them what the bet was. As long as he didn't say anything, the aboriginals couldn't possibly capture craftsmen from all walks of life, right? Furthermore, there were many things that a craftsman couldn't know all of. For example, cloth dyeing red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. A craftsman might not necessarily know all of them. Therefore, as long as he informed the other party before the competition, the possibility of the other party cheating was eliminated. In that case, the Zhang family definitely wouldn't lose. Inform me when you are ready, Ren Baqin said unhurriedly, got up, nodded at the other party, and walked down the restaurant with his guards. As for the food and wine, it was just a pretense and he wasn't in the mood to eat. On the contrary, he was somewhat happy to meet such a family of fools. If everything went smoothly, he would be able to earn a batch of skilled workers. If the other party went back on their words, he would just kill them all after conquering the Yun nation. After Ren Baqin left, Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju angrily said, "This person is too arrogant. Fifth uncle, are we really going to compete with him?" Zhang Junjing snorted. A competition is naturally a competition, and we can also let them see the capabilities of the Zhang family. As for what happens next, it will depend on Qi Zixiao. Qi Zixiao is the ruler of a nation after all, and he has his own plans. No matter what excuse he comes up with, he won't be easily deceived in the face of victory and defeat. However, Dayo isn't a good place after all. When the time comes, we will split into two groups, one toward Great Xia and the other toward Dayo, Zhang Junjing said as he pondered. Ren Baqin returned to the palace, sat in the garden with the Empress, and jokingly told her about what happened just now. It's really unexpected to meet someone who wants to compete in these things. It's quite interesting. Ren Baqin chuckled. The Empress rolled her eyes at him and said, "You went to see Li Fu, but you caused such trouble." Li Fu is nothing. He has a really good temper. As for this Zhang family, they are all skilled workers who can understand many things easily. It's also easy for them to do things. Ren Baqin had already determined the other party's identity. "Aren't you afraid that others will learn from you?" the Empress asked. Back then, when Dayo wanted to learn from other countries, the three emperors of Dayo remembered how the other countries blocked their technology and knowledge. It was still very difficult for the Empress to let go of this aspect. It doesn't matter if they learn something. After all, what they learn is from the past, and it's all related to the people's livelihood. The real core is still in science and technology. Furthermore, with them, it will be easier to occupy the Yun nation, Ren Baqin said. There was too much knowledge on Earth, so much that he could squander it at will. Naturally, he wouldn't care. Furthermore, a person's energy was limited. No matter how much knowledge he could obtain, it would be useless if he didn't have the energy to do it. Furthermore, the other party also had an important role. After conquering the Yun nation, they could play a significant role in pacifying the people and serve as a role model. "I promised to send a batch of secret manuals to the Messier 87, but I've been busy these days and didn't have the time," Ren Baqin said. Although he had already returned to Lan City, he was still remotely commanding the rearguard commandery and couldn't let go for a short period of time. He even spent less time admiring the flowers in the garden with the Empress. Chapter 572. Qingxin Palace Hall. Nothing seemed to have changed here. There were only two people in the huge hall. One of them was Librarian Lin, who had a fake cough, and the other was Lin Xiaola, who was always sleeping. When Ren Baqin walked into the courtyard, he saw Lin Xiaola lying on her back, sleeping soundly and basking in the sun. Compared to when he first saw her, she seemed to be more daring. Back then, she had always been sleeping in Qingxin Palace Hall and would get a shock every time someone came. But now, not only was she openly lying in the courtyard, but she was also unshakable. Ren Baqin walked around her and pushed open the door of Qingxin Palace Hall. After walking a dozen steps, he opened the door on the left and saw piles of secret manuals. Speaking of which, the harvest from this trip to Tianjing Basin wasn't small. Finally, he searched the rebellious sects and warlords' residences. After counting the gold, silver, and jewelry, he found at least 100,000 taels of gold, which was equivalent to 1,000,000 taels of silver. The Empress's annual income from the gold mine was only 120,000 taels of silver. 1,000,000 taels of silver was already a huge sum for Dayo. Unfortunately, this income eventually went to the national treasury. The secret manuals in this house belonged to the Empress. There were more than 13,000 secret manuals. Excluding the duplicates, there were at least 6,000 of them. There were different levels of people, and so were the secret manuals. If they were classified according to the high, middle, and low levels, 80% of them could be classified as relatively shallow, 18% as intermediate, and close to 2% as high level. Less than 0.1% of the secret manuals were top-notch. For example, the treasures of the 8 major sects could be classified as top-notch. In addition, there were other miscellaneous things such as face-changing. At first, Ren Baqin was rather interested in it, but after looking at it carefully, he realized that it wasn't much different from modern makeup. It was just that due to the materials used, the makeup would last longer on the face. It wasn't like in novels where a human skin mask would immediately change one's identity. There were also some methods of making medicine, the secret methods of taming snakes, insects, war elephants, monkeys, and birds, as well as some other miscellaneous things. One of the small sects had an interesting formula called the marching pill. If it was made according to the formula, the size of a fingernail would be enough to feed an ordinary person a meal. Even for Aboriginal warriors, the size of half a fist would be enough. With this thing, a soldier could carry half a month to a month's worth of rations at a time. They could completely abandon the heavy logistics and long-distance raids. The only problem was that many of the ingredients were produced in the 60,000 mountains, and there weren't many of them. They were expensive, so it was difficult to promote them to the entire army. They still needed the medical bureau to find something to replace them. Rinpoche picked out more than 500 low-level secret manuals, 50 middle-level secret manuals, and 3 high-level secret manuals. The next step was to convert these secret manuals into simplified characters. The ancients once said, "When there is a problem, the disciple will help. When there is wine and food, the teacher will serve." Is this filial piety? The ancients also said, "A filial son who has deep love must be amiable, amiable must be pleasing, pleasing must be graceful, pleasing must be gracious, pleasing must be gracious, pleasing must be gracious." When it is time to tell a story, the only thing that is difficult to listen to is lust. Serving is not enough to be filial. What it meant was, if there's a problem, the disciple will do it. There was wine and meat for teacher to eat. Furthermore, the disciple had to be amiable and happy. Even if you did it, if you didn't do it happily, that wouldn't be filial. The next day, Rinpoche gave them homework with a smile on his face. From today onwards, each of you will take 12 secret manuals back and convert them into simplified characters. Write one in hand in one. If there are any mistakes, do you see the flagpole outside? I will let you flutter in the wind and let loose. If you don't finish writing, not only will you flutter in the wind for a day, but you will also receive bullets. When the students from the Black Bamboo Academy heard this and looked at the stacks of secret manuals that Rinpoche asked people to move into the room, their faces turned green. Each of them had to be responsible for 12 secret manuals for 7 days. In addition, they had to attend classes in the morning. As a result, the lights in every student's room remained lit every night. 7 days later, 49 students with panda eyes and gritted teeth stacked the secret manuals in one room. 7 days. During these 7 days, everyone slept less than 4 hours a day. After 7 days, they began to doubt their lives. The only good thing was that after 7 days, their simplified Chinese characters were even better than Rinpoche's. After all, he had been using a computer for so long that he almost couldn't write. 3 days off. All of you have read about the steam engine in physics class. After 3 days, you will start learning how to build the steam engine. Rinpoche smiled as he took back more than 500 secret manuals and gave everyone 3 days off. It was time to build the steam engine. The steam engine could be said to be the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Although the technology in this world hadn't developed to this stage, it would be very fast with its own impetus. After the steam engine was built and had its own thrust, the development of technology would take a leap forward in a short period of time. After hearing this, everyone directly lay on the table and didn't even have the energy to cheer. Their brains were almost emptied, and the steam engine was no longer in their consideration. That night, Rinpoche returned to Earth with the secret manuals. The 6 winged cavalry warriors and the tutor, Ding Jia, were drinking there. The 6 of them were mainly drinking, and Ding Jia was holding a glass of water and slurping it. 2 of them were bragging about how they had experienced storms and rainbows while the other 4 looked envious. Rinpoche grinned. Those 2 idiots. After he left, they went to look for a prostitute and ended up destroying her place. Then they smashed her drug den. However, the physical fitness of these winged cavalry warriors was indeed too strong. Soft drugs like ecstasy and K-powder basically had no effect on them. That's right, they smashed the drug den because the ecstasy and K-powder sold to them weren't effective. They felt cheated. They didn't know what it was and only heard that it felt like they were flying after using it. Lady Boss. Seeing Rinpoche, the 6 tall and burly winged cavalry warriors stood up to greet him. Rinpoche picked up a decorative ornament and threw it at them. Boss. Only Ding Jia obediently called him boss. After all, an honest child was the most lovable. It's second boss. Rinpoche grunted, went upstairs to change his clothes, and called young senator. He asked someone to move the secret manuals into the car and called a winged cavalry warrior to follow him out. When he arrived at the underground garage of the Messier 87 department, Yang Sun was already waiting there with his men. When he saw that the back seat and trunk were full of manuals, Yang Sun was immediately shocked. The members of the Messier 87 department behind Yang Sun all gasped in unison. Although Rinpoche had promised them before and had already called them in advance, he still didn't expect there to be so many. One had to know that these were cultivation manuals. They weren't cabbages. Previously, when Rinpoche sent them the original version of the secret manuals, they usually stored them in a safe. Although they knew that these things weren't very rare for Rinpoche, they were still shocked to see him pulling a car full of them as if they were cabbages. Rinpoche was really generous this time. With these secret manuals, the deduction speed would be faster, and more types of martial arts could be deduced to suit different people. At the same time, They could better understand the cultivation system and the characteristics of each level through these secret manuals. When Rinpoche returned, he gave Ding Jie a secret manual that had been improved by the nation, which was the kind that Rinpoche had given to his parents. This is for you. This is easier to learn and won't cause problems, but remember, don't spread it. If it spreads, you know the consequences. You will harm him and yourself. Ding Jie had always felt regretful after Rinpoche stopped him from learning martial arts from the winged cavalry warriors. He would feel lost in bed at night, so it was a huge surprise to receive this secret manual from Rinpoche. Boss, I will definitely do my best. Chapter 573. The title of Aboriginal Barbarians was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. However, this was only because the Aboriginals didn't have the concept of science and technology. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were so strong that they could solve most of the problems in this world with force. Therefore, in other aspects they would rarely think about it. Although this saying wasn't entirely correct, it explained a lot of the problem. Because they were lazy, they wanted to use tricks and came up with all kinds of labor-saving methods. This was the prototype of machinery. However, after a period of studying the foundation of science and technology, physics, the students of the Black Bamboo Academy were no longer the traditional Aboriginals who only had muscles in their brains. Although they hadn't made a steam engine with the little knowledge they had learned due to their lack of vision and experience, they had made a pressure cooker. The ground in front of the row of students was splashed with mud. What I want is a steam engine. Can you make a pressure cooker for me in 12 days? Looking at Rinpoche, who was brandishing the 81 rifle, the students standing at the front were all smiling mischievously. Teacher, we are already halfway there. With the intake pipe, pistons, shunt box, connecting rods and crank wheels, it will be a simple steam engine. Shurgan vowed. I don't believe you. Rinpoche was so angry that he almost laughed. Someone hang all of them on the flagpoles. Let them flutter in the wind and find themselves. Rinpoche said angrily. Who dares to hang me? Tong Lan, the little Lolita, immediately exploded and jumped 10 feet high. Sir, we don't have enough poles. The guards looked at the 3 wooden pillars in the courtyard that were about 5 to 6 meters tall and felt a little awkward. Hang the rest of them on the wall. Rinpoche said hatefully. In less than 2 hours, Tong Lan, who had dark circles under her eyes, and a group of mischievous students were hanging on the wall of the academy. There were 3 pillars in the courtyard, and there were 6 people hanging on each pillar. Some of the palace guards who were passing by laughed out loud when they saw more than a dozen people hanging on the pillars and a row of people hanging on the wall. Rinpoche strolled back to the palace. The Empress had just finished her morning court session and casually asked him when she saw his dark face. After hearing what Rinpoche said, the Empress chuckled. You have to put some thought into teaching your students. The teacher who taught me back then was so angry that he smashed a table every day. He didn't expect the Empress to have such a dark history. However, when Rinpoche asked again, the Empress smiled and didn't answer. The Empress pointed at a row of wooden doors and said, We should change the paper windows in this hall to glass so that it will be brighter. After all, the transparency of window paper was much lower, and it was very easy to tear. If it was made of glass, the bedroom would not be so dark. The Empress had always disliked an empty and cold palace. She preferred a brighter place. I have already gotten someone to do it. It will be done in another 2 days. Rinpoche was successfully diverted by the Empress. The 2 of them walked around in the garden. Rinpoche plucked a small white flower and placed it in her hair bun. The Empress smiled and asked, Outstanding? Rinpoche looked at the little white flower. Sure enough, it was that outstanding little white flower from back then. He immediately laughed. After walking around in the garden with the Empress, Rinpoche's mood immediately improved. Otherwise, he would be so angry that he would have a heart attack if he had to face those idiots every day. 2 days later, the glass that Rinpoche had instructed was ready, and they began to replace the paper windows in the bedroom. Fortunately, the original window frame was very thick, and the 6 millimeters thick glass could be placed inside. After that, a wooden strip was used to seal the back of the Empress's bedroom. Immediately, the Empress's bedroom became brighter, and people wouldn't feel bored inside. However, another problem arose. Ever since the glass windows were replaced, the temperature in the bedroom began to rise. Fortunately, the hall was deep and spacious enough. With the addition of ice and fans, the Empress wasn't affected much. The Empress was in a good mood for the next few days. Especially at night, when the 2 of them had dinner in the palace and lit up a string of lanterns, the Empress's mood was exceptionally good. She was always smiling, unlike the cold and cheerless appearance she had in front of others. The two of them sat opposite each other in the depths of the palace and drank softly. It was rather heartwarming. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan felt this particularly deeply. In the past, the Empress was always cold and cheerless, and people didn't dare to get close to her. The Empress today was like a completely different person compared to a year ago. Even though she still looked cold and cheerless at other times, she was a little better than before and wouldn't get angry easily. With Principal Rin by her side, the Empress smiled more often. Even if she didn't smile, her face wouldn't be cold. She gave off a much gentler vibe and was easier to get close to. After replacing the glass windows in the Empress's bedroom, the next step was the throne room. A few days later, when Tang Jingye went to court, he saw many people standing in front of the throne room whispering to each other. He was wondering if some unlucky fellow had offended the Empress and gotten whipped. As a result, he walked forward with his legs crossed, raised his head and followed everyone's gaze. He was stunned. There were a total of 12 doors in the throne room. Usually, only 6 of them were open and everyone couldn't be more familiar with them. However, at this moment, the paper windows on the 12 doors of the throne room had disappeared. What's going on? Tang Jingye was a little puzzled. Why did Her Majesty remove the paper windows? Could it be that it's so cool? Qin Xuan and Tang Jingye arrived one after the other. Seeing that everyone had stopped, they didn't stop. Instead, they walked forward with their legs crossed, stretched out their hands, and patted the originally empty paper windows. Crash! The main door was inlaid with a piece of glass. At this moment, it shattered into countless pieces and fell to the ground. Qin Xuan was dumbfounded. He looked at his hand and then at the door. This time, everyone finally discovered the problem. There's something on it. Is it crystal? It's worth a lot. I'm afraid Sir Qin is going to get beaten up. Where did so many large pieces of crystal come from? Furthermore, they're so thin that you can't see them if you don't look carefully. Is this the thing called glass that Principal Rin made? Tang Jingye immediately thought of the glass factory outside the city. However, that factory belonged to the imperial family, and he was only responsible for finding some craftsmen. He didn't know much about what happened after that, but he knew that it was making a transparent crystal-like thing. After pondering for a while, Tang Jingye looked at Qin Xuan with evil intentions and laughed mischievously. Qin Xuan's face darkened when he heard everyone gloating over his misfortune. Sir Minister, you're amazing. Lian Liang from the Department of the Army gave a thumbs up. With a black face, Qin Xuan sent Lian Liang flying with a kick. A moment later, the Empress entered the door and discovered that the glass had been broken less than a day after it was installed. She immediately raised the corner of her eyes and emitted a murderous aura. Then the culprit, Qin Xuan, was sent flying out of the throne room by the Empress with a kick. A few days later, another glass shop opened in Lan City for the imperial family, and it was immediately overcrowded. P.S. Follow the official WeChat account. Limioxis 666. Chapter 574. The originally bustling Jingyang Street had become a lot more desolate after half a year of war, especially after Great Xia, the Yun nation and the Qin nation cut off the trade routes to Dayu. Most of the salt, wine and cloth shops that used to be the most popular were closed. Most of the pedestrians were in a hurry or went to the shops and restaurants opened by the aboriginals. Only when the government started selling salt every once in a while would this street become lively. However, in the past few days this area of the street was filled with people. Not only did the high officials of the court frequently come and go, but many pedestrians also stopped here. From afar, one could see a sign that said, Imperial Glass, hanging in the middle of the area. Zhang Junjing, Zhang Hiqi and Zhang Heju were watching from afar, but they couldn't see clearly because there were so many people in front of them. Zhang Heqi pointed to the front and said, "Fifth uncle, it's there. You said that it's filled with transparent glassware. I remember that there were aboriginals peddling similar goods in the country half a year ago. Later they were robbed by the warlord of Qingfeng City Yi Ke. A month later Yi Ke's entire family was wiped out, and the glassware was taken back. According to what you said, those glassware are cheap. I don't understand why they came all the way here just to snatch these things back," Zhang Junjing said doubtfully. He would never have imagined that when Rinpoche saw the things that Hong Bao snatched back, he felt like 10,000 alpacas were running and jumping in his heart. At that time Rinpoche felt like kicking Hong Bao to death. Rinpoche asked them to plunder other people's treasure troves, even if it was just some silver. In the end, after running around, they managed to snatch back the glasses and mirrors that had been stolen. Later, Renbachien weighed his and Hong Bao's fighting strength and gave up resentfully. However, he felt even more depressed when he saw Hong Bao's expression of wanting to take credit for the good stuff. Zhang Junjing and his nephew squeezed through the crowd. If the three of them didn't have some martial skills, they wouldn't even be able to squeeze into the outer circle. Zhang Junjing was an earthwheel expert, but he was almost pushed across the street by someone. The three of them didn't dare to get angry. There were quite a few aboriginal commoners in the crowd who were equivalent to an earthwheel expert. Zhang Junjing thought about how his earthwheel level was already considered a big shot in the Yun nation. Here, even a commoner might not be a match for him. The aboriginals' talent in martial arts was too enviable. Fortunately, they weren't that smart. This was a case of every advantage having its drawbacks. The three of them squeezed to the front with great difficulty and saw that there were still a few guards in front of the shop, mainly to prevent these people from breaking the glass windows. If there was no one watching, Qin Chuan would be the first, but he definitely wouldn't be the last. The three of them stood in front of the crowd and looked at the shop in front of them, clicking their tongues. The wooden boards on both sides of the shop were removed and replaced with 8 doors. Each door was divided into 6 grids, and the center of the grids was completely transparent. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't even notice that there was a layer of transparent crystal-like material on top. Light shone through that layer of glass into the shop, making it extremely bright inside. There weren't many people in the shop, only a few dozen. One could see the inside of the shop from the door. The shelves against the wall were filled with crystal-like products, cups, plates, bowls and boxes. They were dazzling under the illumination of more than a dozen luminous pearls on the wall. "Are these the glass that this shop sells?" Zhang Junjing asked. "It's simply ingenious workmanship. I really don't know how they made it. Furthermore, the price is so cheap. A glass cup only costs 10 taels of silver. Even 100 taels of silver can be sold, right?" Zhang Heqi, who had been here once before, said incredulously. This was the first time he saw someone selling something that could be sold at a high price at a low price. They aren't selling it cheap in the Yun nation. A crystal cup costs 500 taels of silver. It seems like the cost of this kind of glass is very low. That Principal Rin is still quite capable, Zhang Junjing said faintly. "Fifth uncle, about the bet?" Zhang Heju asked softly. "Don't worry, the people are already on their way. They are the best craftsmen in the Zhang family." Zhang Junjing's lips moved slightly, and an extremely weak voice was transmitted to the two of them. A moment later, as people started to come out, the three of them were let in. After entering the shop, the three of them felt a cooling sensation. They saw ice basins filled with ice cubes placed in the corners of the shop. Nowadays, there were dozens of shaved ice shops in Lan City, so ice wasn't rare anymore. The three of them didn't pay too much attention to it and focused all their attention on the glassware on the shelves. "How much does this cost?" Zhang Junjing saw a set of transparent teapots and teacups. He was extremely happy and asked the people in the shop. 800 taels. A lady in the shop glanced at him and said, "So expensive?" Zhang Junjing was astonished. A transparent cup costs 10 taels, yet this set of tea set costs 800 taels? "How much does this cup cost?" Zhang Junjing pointed at a cup and asked, 150 taels. The lady replied. Following her words, the rest of the people in the shop turned to look at the cup and were somewhat astonished. Then they looked at Zhang Junjing and thought about the price they just asked. They began to wonder if there was something wrong with their ears. However, after someone whispered a few words into their ears, the rest of them immediately burst into laughter and felt extremely delighted. Zhang Junjing looked at Zhang Heqi, who was also astonished, and asked, "This isn't 10 taels?" The lady smiled at the three of them in a very formal manner and didn't reply. Zhang Junjing thought for a while, then pulled a long face and said, "Let's go." "Fifth uncle, when I came here previously, I clearly saw them selling it at 10 taels, Zhang Heqi said indignantly after leaving the crowd. "They sold it to the aboriginals at 10 taels. Zhang Junjing said gloomily. He couldn't suppress the anger in his heart. Previously, it was always the people from other countries who increased the price when selling things to the aboriginals. He didn't expect this group of barbarians to reverse the situation. It was really infuriating. Just now, Tong Jinya said that the things in the glass shop are cheap, the Empress said as they sat in the garden. "It's not cheap anymore." Renbachien shook his head. "If it's any more expensive, they will find trouble with me in the future." The cost of making glass was very low. Selling a glass cup for 10 taels of silver was already a sky-high price. For an ordinary official in Dayo, the monthly salary of a supervisor in the Beast Park was only about 6 taels of silver. 2 months' salary could only be exchanged for such a cup. Those who could afford it were also the big shots in the imperial court. Sooner or later, glass would become a cheap commodity that ordinary people could afford. At that time, those big shots in the imperial court who were buying glass products would realize that they had been cheated. One could imagine the reaction of these big shots when they realized that they had been cheated. At that time, there would be people who would challenge him every day. Thinking about the consequences, Rinpoche didn't want to bear it. As long as the sales of glass products go up, the profits won't be low. For those custom-made glass, one window costs at least 6 yuan, which is 60 taels of silver. 2 windows in an ordinary house cost 120 taels of silver. Including the door, it would cost about 200 taels of silver. Which of those adults didn't have 8 or 10 rooms? Also glassware. These things are fragile and will be consumed quickly. As he spoke, he felt a little regretful. In fact, I originally wanted to use the glass to make a fortune in the Yin nation and Great Xia. Unfortunately, it was ruined by this sudden war. Fortunately, I can sell it to them at a high price in the future. As long as they don't learn how to make glass, they will have to pinch their noses and accept it no matter how expensive it is. It's just that I can't sell a cup for 500 taels of silver anymore. They've taken advantage of us so many times in the past. It's time to return some of it. The Empress thought of those hateful foreign merchants in the past. She then thought about how they would pinch their noses and buy things at high prices in the future. She immediately felt great. Yes, you have to pay for what you have done. Rinpoche laughed as well. Even if they don't use glass, they still have mirrors, soap, clocks. They will spit out the money however they eat. The Empress thought about it and felt disgusted by his words. She pinched his ear with one hand and twisted it. P.S. Follow the WeChat official account, Limiox's 666. Chapter 575. Jing Street was a brand new neighborhood that was inhabited by the Jing tribe people from Tianjin Basin. Except for a few who were sent to the glass factory and the imperial palace to take care of the gardens, the rest of them were settled here. The most eye-catching person in Jing Street was the world's #1 expert, Li Fu. On the way here, not many people knew about him, but after arriving here, there were court officials coming to challenge him every day, so it was impossible not to know him. However, the person with the highest status in the hearts of these Jing tribe people wasn't Li Fu but Qingyun Sword. After all, Li Fu wasn't a Jing tribe person, and the country and race didn't mean anything to him. He would only make a move when someone disturbed him. If he was annoyed, he would go to the Black Bamboo Academy to urge Rinpoche or find trouble with him. After a long time, he felt that it was quieter there. When he had nothing to do, he rarely stayed at Jing Street. Most of the time, he would find a place near Black Bamboo Academy to sleep or sit outside the guest hall in a daze, listening to the things that he did not understand. Qingyun Sword was completely different. He was a pure Jing tribe person and was an expert in the rebel army 70 years ago. Even though he lived in seclusion for many years, he never gave up. Zhuocheng stayed in Gu City to oversee things, and as one of the 2 spirit wheel experts in Tianjin Basin, Qingyun Sword became the guardian of all the Jing tribe people here. During this month in Lan City, everyone knew Qingyun Sword's name and respected him from the bottom of their hearts. Today, another 3 people were injured outside the street. The one who did it was a barbarian commoner. The Public Order Bureau's people are always the last to arrive, an old man said as he sat in front of Qingyun Sword. His face was filled with dissatisfaction. Did the Public Order Bureau arrest that person? Qingyun Sword wasn't too surprised because this wasn't the first time such an incident had happened in the past month. They arrested him and released him after 3 lashes, the old man replied. Qingyun Sword nodded. The Public Order Bureau was definitely biased towards the Aboriginals. This was often the case in the past. Sometimes when Rinpoche interfered, the situation would be better. However, it wasn't much better since he couldn't always stay here to guard. Even Qingyun Sword could understand the situation when the Aboriginals were biased towards the Aboriginals. He still did what he promised us, but to achieve what we want, we still have to take it slow, Qingyun Sword comforted. I understand. But in just 1 month, over 100 people have been injured, more than 10 have been seriously injured, and 1 has even died. I'm always angry. There are still more than 10 million people in Tianjin Basin. We have to endure for them, Qingyun Sword said. Tell them that no matter what happens, they are not to get into a conflict with the Aboriginals, regardless of whether it is insulting, making things difficult for them, or provoking them. After all, those barbarians are straightforward people. They just want to have a moment of pleasure and won't think too much about it. Qingyun's sword didn't have much of a solution to this situation. After all, he was currently in the territory of the Aboriginals, and his spirit will level wasn't considered much here. If there were any problems, she could only look for Renbaqian. Fortunately, Renbaqian had severely punished a few Aboriginals who had provoked and injured others, and the number of provocations had decreased significantly over the past few days. The most important thing was to avoid any conflict with the Aboriginals no matter what happened. If there was a conflict, the Aboriginals, who were used to using their fists to do the talking, wouldn't care about those rules and regulations. This was the case even between the Aboriginals. If they fought, they would be caught and whipped by the Public Order Bureau. In fact, many of the injured Jing tribe people were in the same situation. However, the Aboriginals had coarse skin and thick flesh, and most of them were at least at the man-will level. On the other hand, the Jing tribe people were ordinary people, and it was common for them to be injured. If it wasn't for the fact that the Aboriginal commoners saw that they were too weak and couldn't get up after a single punch, there would have been more than a dozen of them who were seriously injured. In short, everything was changing in a good direction. This was just the beginning. As time passed, Qingyun's sword believed that the Jing tribe people would be able to live freely outside of Tianjin Basin. At this time, Renbaqian was sitting in the Empress's carriage, playing cards and fishing with her. They were on their way back from the Great Hunt. At this time last year, Renbaqian had participated in the Great Hunt as a participant and even personally killed someone for the first time in his life. This time around, the situation was completely different. Among the youths who participated in the Great Hunt last year, there weren't many changes except for a few who had entered the army this year. For example, Hong Xian Lu Ruoyao, who had a conflict with Renbaqian, and Du Changkong. However, Renbaqian was completely different. As a rank 4 official, he only participated in the Great Hunt to accompany the Empress. Many people couldn't help but feel envious and jealous. This year, there are a lot fewer people celebrating the Empress's birthday, Renbaqian said as he sat opposite the Empress and drew cards. Last year he was the Honglu deputy. All the foreigners who came to celebrate the Empress's birthday passed through his hands, so he was naturally very clear about it. This year there was still half a month before the Empress's birthday. He paid some attention and found that not only were there a lot fewer people coming to celebrate the Empress's birthday, but there were basically none. In fact, he wanted to see if there were any gigolos who dared to hit on the Empress this year. As it turned out, those guys still knew what was good and bad. At least, they knew that the Empress was taken, which gave him a sense of accomplishment. The Empress didn't even raise her head and said, "This year, after the war with Great Xia, the Yun nation and the Qin nation, who would dare to come?" In any case, in her heart, the only value of celebrating the Empress's birthday was to receive a lot of valuable things to exchange for weapons. She didn't care about those people at all. "What gift do you want, Your Majesty?" Renbaqian laughed. "Are you asking me?" The Empress raised her head and glanced at him. "Even if it's the moon in the sky. Although I can't pluck it, I can take a photo for you." Renbaqian was kicked out of the carriage just as he finished speaking. After a while, Renbaqian returned to the carriage, sat in front of the Empress, and continued to play cards with a serious face. However, he still had to carefully prepare for the Empress's birthday. Last year Hongwu gave him a jade embryo. He couldn't get such a treasure, but he had to be able to move the Empress. After the group returned to Lan City, Renbaqian continued to devote himself to making the steam engine. During this period, Li Fu spent more and more time in Black Bamboo Academy. Renbaqian began to ponder how to trick Li Fu into becoming a sweeping monk. With Li Fu's strength, it would be a waste if he wasn't a sweeping monk. One had to know that the 3 most legendary occupations were the old guard, the sweeping monk and the librarian. Renbaqian was determined to build Black Bamboo Academy into the world's top educational institution. At that time, even an old sweeping monk would be the world's #1 expert. That would be the style of the world's #1 educational institution. Unfortunately, Li Fu scoffed at Renbaqian's deception. Although he had a good character, he wasn't a fool. Right now, he just wanted to watch Renbaqian make his hot air balloon and rocket as soon as possible. Chapter 576. This time it was at a restaurant on Jingyang Street. "Sir Rin, the people from the Zhang family are here. The competition can begin at any time." Zhang Junjing cupped his hands. "Let's do it in 2 days then. What do you want to compete with?" Renbaqian was fiddling with a small box in his hand. He took a deep breath, opened his mouth and spat out a mist with the fragrance of fruits. Even his face couldn't be seen clearly. It was as if he was a spirit from a supernatural story that was puffing clouds and spitting out mist. This made Zhang Junjing and the other two stare at the box in Ren Baqian's hand. Sir Ren, may I ask what this is? Zhang Junjing couldn't help but ask curiously. A small thing. We call it steam cigarettes. Ren Baqian fiddled with the box in his hand and placed it on the table. In fact, this kind of thing had existed on Earth for a long time, but he hadn't paid much attention to it. Once, on his way back, someone passed by smoking this kind of thing. At that time he felt that it was quite fragrant, so he went to a steam cigarette shop to have a look. Then he felt that the ice-cold fruit-scented tobacco oil in this steam cigarette was simply too comfortable. Especially in a hot place like Dayo, one puff made his throat and lungs feel cold, and his mouth was filled with the sweet and fragrant taste of the fruit. After a few days he couldn't bear to part with this thing. Zhang Junjing didn't know what Ren Baqian meant after hearing the name. He looked at it a few more times before looking back at Ren Baqian and asked, Sir Ren, is the bet still the same as before? Of course. If I lose, I will introduce you to Her Majesty and guarantee it. If you lose, the entire Zhang family will move to Dayo to make a name for themselves. They can also learn from me. Speaking of which, you have made a huge profit. Ren Baqian emphasized the entire Zhang family. No matter how one looked at it, the Zhang family had indeed made a huge profit. The Yun nation was on the verge of capsizing. If they hadn't found Ren Baqian at this time, they wouldn't have received such treatment when the Yun nation was destroyed. Not to mention they could learn something from Ren Baqian. Even if it was just some production techniques, it would be enough to benefit the Zhang family. Zhang Junjing didn't comment on this and said, there must always be a witness to the competition. Her Majesty will be the witness. Ren Baqian laughed. The other party had set the time for the competition at this time because they wanted to make a name for themselves during the Empress's birthday celebration. Zhang Junjing smiled. With the Empress as a witness, this competition was the best opportunity to showcase the strength of the Zhang family. The 3 segments of the competition aren't complicated. However, it was not easy to do these 3 things well. The first round is dyeing cloth. There are 7 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. We are competing on durability and not fading. After all, it was not easy to dye a durable fabric that did not fade easily. Although each dyeing house had their own methods, there were differences in the results. This was also a very direct way to determine the winner and loser. The reason why he didn't mention the purity of the color was because there was no standard for the purity of the color. It depended entirely on the individual's preference. This could be faked, but the degree of fading could not be faked. After entering the water, he could wash it with his pancreas, and it would be easy to distinguish. Another reason was that dyeing the cloth would take at least half a month. The Zhang family had a special method to dye the cloth in a short period of time, but the color wouldn't be as good as the cloth that was dyed in half a month. Therefore, Zhang Junjing was very confident in this competition. It would be pretty good if the other party could dye the cloth in such a short period of time. After speaking, he carefully looked at Ren Baqian's expression and felt a little disappointed when he saw that Ren Baqian didn't have any reaction. He didn't know if the other party was really confident or simply didn't understand the difficulties involved. The second segment is to make springs. Zhang Junjing paused for a while before continuing. Springs? Ren Baqian pondered over these 2 words. He didn't expect the Zhang family to actually know how to make springs. This was a little unexpected. Twisting a spring in one's hand required a lot of strength. He had always thought that Great Xia's crossbow battalion used springs, but later discovered that they were multi-strung and fired a row of arrows at a time. As a result, he had never had any expectations for the spring technology of this world. The biggest problem with springs was the material, which was the biggest problem that limited the development of springs. Since the Zhang family had brought it up, they must have a certain standard in this area and might have unique materials. Not bad. This is a spring. As for what this thing is used for, Sir Ren, please forgive me for keeping you in suspense. We will be competing on the tension and elasticity of the spring, Zhang Junjing said confidently as he placed a fist-sized torsion spring on the table. This was the latest technology from the Yun nation. The ballistas used on the battlefield in the Yun nation were made of this kind of torsion spring. Although he knew that Ren Baqian had a small explosive device, he believed that a ballista that could fire 100 bolts at a time and had a range of 200 steps would definitely interest Qi Zixiao. Ren Baqian looked at the torsion spring on the table. Although he already knew that this would be the result of technology, he still didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw how confident the other party was. Competing with modern technology in alloys and springs? Who gave you such confidence? However, Ren Baqian valued the Zhang family even more. Being able to make a spring that met a certain standard was enough to prove the value of the Zhang family's craftsmen. What's the third segment? Ren Baqin asked faintly as he placed the spring on the table. Brewing wine. Sir Ren said that he knew how to brew wine, and the Zhang family also has a certain level of knowledge in brewing wine. We will use the same type of wine as the base, process it again and compete to see how strong the wine is, Zhang Junjing said again. In fact, the most important part of this competition was the spring. He was well aware of the difficulty of making this kind of spring. Even the materials used were brought over from the Yun nation. He believed that Ren Baqin definitely wouldn't be able to do it. As for the other things, they were just extras, but they weren't meaningless. For example, brewing wine. Qi Zixiao had always loved the spirits of the Yun nation. Every time the caravan from Dayo came to the Yun nation, they would purchase a lot of good wine. The best wine in the Yun nation was made by the Zhang family's craftsmen. He believed that brewing wine alone was enough to make Qi Zixiao happy. The torsion spring and ballistas were of great use to the whole of Dayo. Whether it was for public or private reasons, the things that he used for this competition were enough to stabilize the Zhang family in Dayo. Not only that, in order to prevent Dayo from having other ideas, all the craftsmen who came this time were prepared to die and took poison in advance. This also cut off the possibility of Dayo obtaining these production methods from them. Ren Baqin would never allow the Zhang family's technology to be leaked. This was because this was the foundation of their future foothold in Dayo. So be it. The competition will begin in 2 days. Do you have any other requirements? We need a courtyard that is divided into 2 parts. Only materials can be transported in, and we are not allowed to see each other's production methods. We can only compete with the final product. Does Sir Ren agree? Although these techniques couldn't be learned at a glance and there were many unique techniques and formulas, Zhang Junjing still maintained sufficient vigilance for fear of the possibility of the technology being leaked. Ren Baqin thought about it and felt that he had nothing to say. He originally had the intention of bullying them. Now that the other party was full of confidence and had pushed the entire Zhang family into a pit, what else could he say? He took a deep breath of the steam and spat out a mouthful of smoke. Chapter 577. The competition with the Zhang family was decided by Ren Baqin and the Empress. The Empress had never interfered in such matters. After all, she knew nothing about craftsmen. In fact, in her opinion, Ren Baqin was enough. The technology on Earth was enough for Dayo to absorb. Although she hoped to see such a grand occasion sooner, she knew that many things had to be done step by step. Therefore she let Ren Baqin do it. After informing the Empress, Ren Baqin greeted Tong Xingye. In the end, Tong Xingye only watched as Ren Baqin puffed out mouthfuls of smoke from the beginning to the end. After Ren Baqin finished speaking, Tong Xingye snatched the steam cigarette and asked how it was used. He didn't mind Ren Baqin's saliva and took a big gulp. Then he coughed violently. A large amount of steam rushed into his lungs. This impact made it difficult for Tong Xingye to adapt to, but he refused to let go after a while. He liked this kind of thing that could show off. Seeing this, Ren Baqin could only spread his hands. In any case, this thing had already been eaten by Tong Xingye, and he didn't want it anymore. Sure enough, early the next morning, Tong Xingye was already waiting outside the palace. He held Ren Baqin's steamed cigarette in his hand and puffed out clouds of mist. Not long after, it was as if he was surrounded by clouds of mist and couldn't even be seen clearly. Another morning, outside a house in the east of the city, Zhang Junjing and Ren Baqin met. Both of them smiled, and the content of their smiles was roughly the same. Ren Baqin and the Empress came out of the palace at the same time, but Ren Baqin was 1 step ahead. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the Empress arrived in front of the house accompanied by a group of guards. Behind her were Tong Xingye, Shi Qing and a few others. Greetings, Your Majesty. Commoner Zhang Junjing, Zhang Heqi, Zhang Heju, greets the Empress of Dayo. Sitting in the carriage, the Empress looked at Zhang Junjing and his nephew, nodded slightly and asked coldly, "Are you from the Zhang family?" Last year, the 3 of them gave her a generous gift, but she had completely forgotten about it. "Yes, I am." "Yes, do well in the future. Dayo is going to change and there will be a place for all of you to use your skills." The Empress nodded. Ever since she went to Earth, she had been paying more and more attention to the craftsmen. The development of Earth had proven the usefulness of craftsmen. "We will definitely work hard." Zhang Junjing was overjoyed. It seemed like Qi Zixiao valued the Zhang clan very much. Otherwise, with her personality, she wouldn't have said such a thing. Furthermore, what did he mean by Dayo was going to change? The Empress simply said a few words and alighted from the carriage. Accompanied by everyone, she walked around the residence. This was originally the residence of a great Xia merchant, but at this moment, the head of that merchant had already been chopped off. Naturally, this residence was now empty. This mansion was just as the other party had requested. There were 2 courtyards in the east and west. At this time, everything in the 2 courtyards had been moved away, leaving only the empty courtyards and a few rooms. Since you've seen everything, let's begin. The Empress walked around the courtyard and said, I will be the witness. Tang Xinye, the Minister of Works, will also be the witness. Yes. Zhang Junjing immediately replied. It's just that the Zhang family's technology has never been divulged to outsiders, so Minister Tong can't always watch from the side. Only Sir Tong can enter. Although he didn't want to offend the Empress, he didn't want the Zhang family's technology to be divulged. As long as the technology was still there, the Zhang family wouldn't decline. As long as the Empress still wanted the products made by the Zhang family, she wouldn't do anything to them. You are really careful, but... the Empress said faintly. She then glanced at Rinpochen and walked out without looking back. You may begin. I will come back to see the results of the competition after it's over. After the Empress left, Rinpochen turned to Zhang Junjing, smiled and said, Let's begin. I believe all of you are ready in 1 month. Of course. Zhang Junjing nodded, turned his head and whispered a few words to Zhang Heqi. The latter then left. Not long after, carriages covered in black cloth came from the other side of the street and entered the east courtyard. Only one carriage stopped. After opening the cloth, there were 10 jars of wine inside. After opening all of them, Rinpochen took a whiff and sent half of them back to the courtyard. Sir Rin, the wine will be brewed for the second time using this as the base. As for the rest, I won't show them to you. Zhang Junjing cupped his hands. As you wish, Rinpochen replied faintly. He didn't need to think to know that the carriages were all related to the 3 competitions. He hid them so tightly because he was afraid that Rinpochen would steal them. Although Zhang Junjing was cautious enough, he was wrong from the beginning. Rinpochen really didn't care about his technology. Who had ever seen a billionaire steal money from a beggar's bowl? In this regard, Rinpochen had sufficient confidence in Earth's technology. Furthermore, Zhang Junjing had indeed placed too much importance on these technologies in the Zhang family. He even dared to say such things in front of the Empress and Tang Xinye. He would rather take the risk of Tang Xinye making things difficult for the Zhang family in the future and firmly hold on to these technologies. He actually dared to do this when the Zhang family was in a bad situation. Did he really think that the Zhang family was indispensable to Dayo, so he was fearless? Sir Rin, the time limit is 5 days. Minister Tong, I will take my leave now. Zhang Junjing cupped his hands at the 2 of them, went to the east courtyard and closed the door tightly. Umph. Tang Xinye sneered. The Zhang family only had eyes for Her Majesty. If Qin Chuan was here, he would have drawn his sword and chopped him. Sir Tong, the craftsmen and materials that I want should be here soon. Rinpochen turned his head and said to Tang Xinye, who was still standing at the same spot. They will be here soon. Sir Rin, you only have 5 days. The other party has obviously prepared all kinds of tools. You won't lose now, right? Tang Xinye asked. Take a guess, Sir Tong. Do you want to make a bet? Rinpochen changed the topic. Seeing that you are full of confidence, I won't argue with you. I'm just saying casually. If Sir Rin loses, it won't look good for Her Majesty. Tang Xinye laughed. He wasn't a fool. He knew more than anyone else about the various things that Rinpochen came up with. Besides Rinpochen and the Empress, the person who had the most confidence in Rinpochen was him. After a while, carts of materials and a team of craftsmen entered the west courtyard. Zhang Heqi even stuck his head out from the top of the wall to take a look. In the end, he saw Rinpochen looking at him with a smile, so he retracted his head. Rinpochen strolled into the courtyard, gathered the craftsmen, took out the blueprints and began to assign tasks. These blueprints were made by professionals. According to the limitations of this era and the time constraints, these production plans were already the best choices. That afternoon, the sounds of assembling items in the Zhang family's courtyard stopped, and thick smoke rose from the courtyard. The next day, the fragrance of wine wafted out from the courtyard, and at the same time, the sound of forging iron could be heard. In the west courtyard where Rinpochen was, there was still the sound of hammering and sawing wood. Even the tools weren't ready. Fifth uncle, we will definitely win. Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju couldn't help but say as they listened to the sounds in the courtyard next door. At this time, both the east and west courtyards were busy. Although the east courtyard was busy, everything was in order. The craftsmen of the Jianghu family worked separately and didn't disturb each other. In the west courtyard it was a mess. One by one, the craftsmen were working on the blueprints given by Rinpoche. From time to time, they would come over to ask Rinpoche a few questions. The waste that was thrown away in the courtyard was almost piled up to the top of the wall. Even Tong Jinye, who came over to take a look, began to have doubts. He couldn't help but ask, "Sir Rin, why don't we make a bet on whether you will win or lose?" Chapter 578. What are we betting on? Rinpoche asked with a vexed look on his face. He tried his best to look anxious because of the progress. "Looking at your expression, I know that you already have a plan in mind and want to deceive me." Tong Jinye didn't buy it at all. He carefully observed Rinpoche's expression and immediately snorted disdainfully. Rinpoche looked at Tong Jinye with a headache. Who said that the aboriginals were honest boys? This old man only looked honest and straightforward. "Do you want me to scout out the enemy for you?" Tong Jinye laughed. "If Sir Tong has nothing better to do," Rinpoche replied noncommittally. "Haha, I'm just saying. I have confidence in Sir Ren. If I go they will look down on Sir Ren." Tong Jinye laughed it off. This time Rinpoche was really itching. Was this old man here to tease him today? Rinpoche was even more convinced when he saw Tong Jinye walk out with his hands clasped behind his back, humming a mountain tune as he walked. Rinpoche pondered for a long time but couldn't figure out how he had provoked Tong Jinye recently. Since he couldn't think of anything, he decided not to think about it. Rinpoche strolled back to the house, took out a few bundles of different thicknesses, and threw them to the blacksmiths. The blacksmiths were extremely surprised after trying the spring steel wire that Rinpoche took out. Even though they hadn't come into contact with modern alloys, they could tell that the steel wire that Rinpoche gave them was completely different from anything they had seen before. After wrapping the steel wire around the arm a few times and loosening it, the steel wire actually bounced perfectly straight and wasn't out of shape like ordinary steel. Not to mention the fact that there was no irregularity in these steel wires at all. They were of the same thickness from the beginning to the end, but there were no signs of hammering. This made the blacksmiths feel as if these steel wires were made by nature and not by human hands. Not long after, the sound of hammering could be heard in the courtyard. However, a new problem quickly emerged. This steel wire would become brittle or have other problems after being heated and hammered. Although they might find a solution if given some time, time was what they lacked the most at the moment. "It's okay, I'm just letting you try it out." Rinpoche waved his hand and smiled in response to the blacksmith's doubts. He had already known about this before. This was a special kind of carbon spring steel wire, which was very difficult to process in this era. After secondary processing, it was easy to change the free gas and carbon content in the steel wire, and at the same time, change the performance of the steel wire in all aspects. What he had brought was just a cover-up. After hearing his words, the blacksmiths excitedly carried the coils of steel wire back to do various experiments, and soon discovered new uses for these steel wires, for example weaving them into whips, and a single whip could take away half a life. In this regard, he could only say that he had really underestimated the extent of the Aboriginals' obsession with weapons. No matter what it was in their hands, they would quickly discover that it could be used to attack others. Even if it was just a steel wire, it could still be used to whip people. Out of the 3 items in the bet, one of them was dyeing, which went very smoothly. Dayo simply didn't have the technology to make textiles. Similarly, they didn't have the technology to dye cloth. Therefore, they could only find a few quick-witted craftsmen from the Ministry of Works. The dyes were all kinds of direct dyes that Rinpoche brought back. Not only were there all kinds of colors, red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue and purple, but each color was also divided into 3 types. For example, yellow was light yellow, lemon yellow, and golden yellow. Red was bright red, peach red. If it weren't for the limited amount of things he could bring back, he would have brought back 30 colors of each item. When the time came, he could make 210 colors, and he was sure that the Jianghu family would start to doubt their own existence. As for the cloth, it was cotton cloth brought back from Earth. Each piece was 7 feet wide and 10 feet long. Finally, there was the color-fixing agent. The color of the dye that Rinpoche brought was bright, and the only drawback was that it would easily fade after contact with water. In fact, this was the case with most dyes. Although Rinpoche didn't know what methods the other party used to reduce the fading, he assumed that it was some old-fashioned method. Even if it reduced the fading, it would only be to a certain extent. The color-fixing agent was completely different. The epoxy group in the color-fixing agent and certain groups in the fiber dye molecules formed a covalent bond to achieve the effect of stabilizing the dye. First, the cotton cloth was directly soaked in the dye, dyed and dried. Depending on the situation, it was decided whether to dye it again. Then it was soaked in the color-fixing agent liquid at a certain temperature for 15 minutes before drying. What these craftsmen needed to do was very simple, and they were all done in 3 days. In fact, this time, Rinpoche was actually busy with brewing wine, which Zhang Junjing didn't care about the least. What he had been doing in the courtyard was distillation. Rinpoche had long wanted to brew wine. One had to know that it was unknown whether it was due to the special environment in this world or that this world was filled with some kind of substance that was different from Earth. Not only did the meat taste delicious, but it also contained energy that could replenish the body. The taste of fruits and grains were also extremely fragrant and sweet. If he used the same method to brew wine, it would be much better than the wine on Earth. If it wasn't for the fact that the brewing technology in this world was still a little backward, the Empress wouldn't have to carry sorghum liquor every day. After using 3 days, Rinpoche finally created a pot-type distilling boiler. At this time, the fragrance of the wine in the courtyard next door had already started to dissipate. It seemed that their wine had already been brewed. Instead, the sound of forging iron rang out continuously every day. On the 4th day, the courtyard where Rinpoche and the others were at began to emit a strong fragrance of wine. The fragrance was so strong that it made people salivate just by smelling it from outside. The first to discover it was Zhang Heqi and the others in the courtyard next door. Soon after, Zhang Junjing, who had received an urgent report, ran out drowsily. Upon smelling the fragrance of the wine, Zhang Junjing's expression changed. What a strong fragrance! One could tell the progress of Rinpoche's brewing just by looking at his nose. This was the first time that the fragrance of wine had come out of Rinpoche's courtyard, and it was actually so strong. It was almost as strong as the Zhang family's wine, which had been processed 3 times. Although it wasn't as strong as the Zhang family's wine, Zhang Junjing was already a little worried. After standing in the courtyard for a while, Zhang Junjing glanced at the people around him and said in a deep voice, "Go do your own things. This wine is slightly inferior to our Zhang family's wine. Even if we lose this round, it won't affect the overall situation. All you have to do is do your own things." After hearing Zhang Junjing's words, the people who were attracted by the fragrance of the wine dispersed. As for the taste of the wine, Zhang Junjing wasn't surprised. The wine that Zhang Junjing used for the competition was definitely the best in order to impress the Empress. Chapter 579. Rinpoche, who was in the courtyard, was a little surprised. The aroma of this wine was mellow and had a hint of fruity aroma. One had to know that the base wine was provided by Zhang Junjing, so it should have been made by the Zhang family. Rinpoche had been focusing on increasing the intensity of the wine and didn't pay much attention to the original base wine. However, this aroma made him realize that the Zhang family was indeed skilled in brewing wine. If they were to compete in brewing wine, he might not be able to produce wine that was better than theirs in a short period of time. After all, there were many factors that affected the taste of wine. For example, the 1982 Lafite was so famous because the grapes ripened almost perfectly that year. As a result, the ingredients used to brew wine here were different from those on Earth. He definitely had to experiment more to brew a wine that tasted better. Unfortunately, they were competing in the intensity of the wine. Such is life. Rinpoche thought about the Zhang family and felt that they were indeed a little unlucky. If they hadn't met him, they would probably have had the opportunity to show off their skills. However, this was also good as they would be able to display their greatest value in his hands. Rinpoche conveniently gave himself a thumbs up for his wisdom and bravery. He scooped some wine from the jar outside the distilling boiler and drank it. It tasted fragrant, mellow, soft, and lingered in the mouth. It was indeed a good wine, better than all the wines he had drunk before. As for the alcohol content, it was about 35%. After distilling 5 jars of wine, he obtained about 2.5 jars of wine with 35% alcohol. Rinpoche then distilled it again and obtained 1.5 jars of wine with 50% alcohol. At this time, the wine was like a raging fire when it entered the stomach, but the aroma was even more intense and tempting. After the 4th distillation, the aroma of the wine completely changed. Although it still had the original aroma after careful analysis, it gave off a completely different feeling. There were a few more flavors as if it had become a completely different wine. At this time, the aroma of the wine had spread throughout the entire courtyard and could be smelled from half the street. Moreover, smelling this aroma made one feel like they were half drunk. A group of people had gathered outside the courtyard and were smelling the aroma with covetous looks on their faces. Even Zhang Junjing, who was in the courtyard next door, was shocked when he smelled this aroma. This aroma should be very familiar, but it felt very strange to him. It was as if it was a different kind of wine from the past, one on the ground and the other in the sky. How did the other party do it? What did he add to the wine? In fact, what Rinpoche was doing was just distillation. However, after the fourth distillation of the wine reached 65 degrees Celsius, some unknown changes occurred, and the aroma of the wine suddenly increased by a large margin. A few aromas that weren't easy to discover were completely highlighted and became an intoxicating aroma. Such fragrant wine. A coarse voice rang out in the courtyard. Qin Chuan had somehow arrived here by following the smell, and he grabbed the jug of wine with one hand. The wine belongs to Her Majesty. Rinpoche was shocked. This was to be used for the competition. After the competition, everything would be fine. But now he couldn't let anyone drink it. Give me some. In the future I'll be in danger. If you want to teach Tong Jingye a lesson, I won't hesitate to do so. Qin Chuan's eyes were glued to the wine jar in his hand. Who are you talking about, old man? Tong Jingye's gloomy voice resounded in the courtyard almost immediately. At the same time, he struck Qin Chuan's back with the black tiger steals the heart. The moment Qin Chuan turned around, Tong Jingye's hand reached out to grab the wine jar. Old man, I'm talking about you. Qin Chuan was furious. Tong Jingye laughed mischievously. His black tiger steals the heart was blocked by Qin Chuan, and he took advantage of the situation to execute an extremely fast groin kick. Both of you get lost. The Empress's angry voice resounded in the air. Following which, a figure in red descended from the sky and grabbed the wine jar with one hand. Taking advantage of the situation, she kicked the two of them away. Two human-shaped holes immediately appeared on the wall of the courtyard. Your Majesty, why are you here? Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Your smell is too strong. Those two bastards have been loitering around here for a long time. Rinpoche understood the Empress's words as soon as he heard it. The fragrance of the wine must have spread out during the distillation process and been smelled by others. Even he was surprised by the fragrance of the wine, let alone others. Then, someone spread the news to the two of them, and they came here to stare at the wine jar, ready to snatch it. These two old bastards were willing to throw away their pride just for a mouthful of wine. It was possible that these two weren't the only ones. It was just that the others couldn't compete with them, so they didn't show up when they saw them. It was a pity that the Empress appeared out of nowhere and gave each of them a kick. The Empress held the wine jar in one hand and raised her head to gulp it down. She felt that the fragrance of the wine was tempting. Following which, a ball of fire rose in her stomach, and her face began to turn red. What a fragrant wine! What a strong wine! The Empress exclaimed in surprise. She raised her head to the sky and gulped down another mouthful. After 2 mouthfuls, almost half of the wine jar was gone. Your Majesty, drink slowly. This wine is strong and you have to save some for the competition, Rinpoche quickly said. I know, but this wine is so fragrant. The Empress exhaled, and a strong fragrance of the wine sprayed from her mouth onto Rinpoche's face. After gulping down half of the wine jar, her face turned red from ear to ear, and her voice was lazy and alluring. She looked down at the wine jar and then at Rinpoche. She chuckled and took another sip. Her eyes began to become hazy. Your Majesty, wait for me to take another sip. The Empress felt the rich sweetness in her mouth. She liked it and gulped down another mouthful of wine. This time she took a smaller sip, but her eyes became even more hazy. Your Majesty, you really can't drink any more? Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He knew that the Empress loved wine, but he didn't expect the wine jar to be so tempting. She hugged it tightly and didn't want to let go. It seemed like he really had to get the recipe for the Zhang family's wine. I know. I'll take another sip. The Empress gulped down another mouthful of wine. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the wine jar was gone. The Empress's drunkenness became more obvious. Even though the Empress had a good capacity for alcohol, this jar contained about 5 caddies of wine. She drank more than half of it in a few mouthfuls, and her drunkenness became obvious. Your Majesty, you really can't drink any more? Rinpoche was helpless. The Empress was already drunk, and if he allowed her to continue drinking, he was afraid that the wine jar would be empty. He had no choice but to reach out to grab the wine jar. When the Empress saw him reach out, she lifted the wine jar and Rinpoche pounced on empty air. He pounced directly in front of the Empress, and the distance between them was only 1 foot. Rinpoche saw that the Empress's face was pink, her eyes were hazy, and she looked charmingly naive while holding the wine jar. He couldn't help but feel a fire burning in his heart as he leaned forward and kissed her. Then he was bitten on the lips by the Empress. Ouch, 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 ouch. Rinpoche was in so much pain that his tears were about to fall. Good for nothing. The Empress rolled her eyes at him coquettishly. She took a step back and drank another mouthful of wine. Only then did she throw the wine jar back to him. She let out a few seductive giggles and jumped into the air in a flash. She almost stumbled and fell from the sky. After a few flashes, she disappeared. When the Empress left, Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan, who were hiding somewhere, appeared in front of Rinpoche again. This is all for the competition. Please don't think about it anymore, Rinpoche said helplessly as he hugged the wine jar. In fact, this wine was distilled and had a higher alcohol content than the Jiang family's wine. Why were they behaving like lechers who had seen a peerless beauty? Tong Jinya, Qin Chuan, the two of you come into the palace. The Empress's voice traveled for an unknown distance and reached the hands of a few people in the courtyard. The two of them grimaced in pain and looked at the wine jar in Rinpoche's hand, which was still emitting a strong aroma of wine. Soon after, they disappeared from the courtyard in a flash. Rinpoche waited for the two of them to leave before he carefully took a sip of the wine. At first, he felt that his mouth was full of mellow fragrance and sweetness. Soon after, he felt as if his throat and stomach had been set on fire. After the extreme heat, it turned into a trace of cool air that soothed his throat that had just been set on fire. He couldn't help but moan at the peculiar comfort. No wonder the Empress hugged this wine jar and didn't let go. It was indeed good wine. Chapter 580. These days, other than returning to the palace at night, Rinpoche spent the rest of his time in that courtyard, in a daze. He was in a daze because all he did from beginning to end was instructing others on how to make the distilling boiler, which wasn't considered complicated. Other than that, he spent most of his time in a daze. After being busy for a few months in Tianjin Basin, he enjoyed being able to be in a daze with nothing to do. Due to his special status, Rinpoche rarely interacted with other officials. As a result, he didn't know that there was more than one discussion about him outside the courtyard these days. The main reason was about the rearguard commandery in Tianjin Basin and the current Jiang family. Although the rearguard commandery was still outside the establishment, with the approval of the Empress, it would soon become an official department of Dayo. This time, regardless of whether the Jiang family won or lost, they would probably serve Dayo in the future. If the Jiang family won against Rinpoche, they would probably take this opportunity to get an official position. Rinpoche was used to multi-ethnic countries on Earth and was used to letting the capable ones handle everything. This seemed normal to Rinpoche, but it wasn't a small matter in the hearts of many people. This was because in the past few decades, there had never been a precedent of someone from another race entering the imperial court as an official. It could be said that he had a special status. After experiencing the initial onlookers, everyone began to accept Rinpoche as the Empress's future husband with each and every one of his actions. However, now that there was the addition of the rearguard commandery made up entirely of remnant citizens of the Hao nation and the Jiang family, many people in the imperial court had objections. However, the Empress had already approved of these two matters. With her temperament, no one could stop these two matters. The discussions couldn't be suppressed, but they didn't reach Rinpoche's ears. Even the Water Empress had heard about it. However, she merely chuckled and put the matter aside, ignoring it. There were many things that she had seen more than others. Judging from the final outcome of Tianjin Basin, she had a little more confidence in Rinpoche's approach. All that was left was to wait for time to test and see if everything would develop as Rinpoche had expected. 5 days passed just like that. 5 days later, when the east gate opened, a neatly dressed Zhang Jun stood in front of it. He looked up and saw that the west gate was already open. Rinpoche was sitting in a rocking chair in front of it, dozing off. "Thank you for waiting, Sir Rin." Zhang Junjing laughed. He was also wondering if Rinpoche had done everything or if he had given up after failing. Based on his experience, the latter was more likely. However, he was still worried and even more nervous than before. After all, this matter concerned the future of half of the Zhang clan. It could be said to be of great importance, and even he couldn't avoid it. Although he was dressed neatly and appeared to be in high spirits, his bloodshot eyes still spoke volumes. You guys are done too? Rinpoche raised his head and looked at Zhang Junjing and his nephews, as well as the tightly wrapped carriages behind the gate. I'll get someone to inform Her Majesty to be a witness, Rinpoche said with a smile. He turned around and shouted. Very soon a guard left. Thank you, Sir Rin. Zhang Junjing cupped his hands, sat down and closed his eyes to rest. After 2 hours, everyone heard the sound of horses coming from outside the courtyard. Many people had arrived. Rinpoche finally perked up and went out to welcome the Empress. After exiting the door, Rinpoche saw a majestic procession. Other than the guards and the Empress's imperial chariot, there were also many ministers behind them. For example, Shiqing, Tong Jinya, Tu Wan, and the others were among them. All of them wore sunglasses and looked like blind bears walking upright. The aboriginal men were majestic and the women were enchanting. Tu Wan and a few other female officials with graceful figures were also very eye-catching. Greetings, Your Majesty. Rinpoche greeted the Empress first. Then he smiled and swept his gaze across the officials. He discovered that Li Qianxiu, Shi Yueya and Hong Wu were among them. It seemed like they had returned to attend the Empress's birthday celebration. Li Qianxiu and Shi Wanya gently nodded at Rinpoche as a greeting. On the other hand, Hong Wu was furious. When Rinpoche and the Empress left, he purposely kissed him at the city gate. He had been suppressing his resentment for half a year, and now he could finally see Rinpoche. If looks could kill, Rinpoche would have been hacked into pieces by him. It just so happens that the court session is taking place, so I asked everyone to follow me to take a look, the Empress said. Rinpoche didn't think much of it as he had seen many of these people. Zhang Junjing, on the other hand, was excited. The bigger the scene, the better. Furthermore, the fact that the Empress had brought so many high-ranking officials made him feel that the Empress was taking this matter very seriously. Please get ready and begin, the Empress said faintly as she walked forward in her red dress. Everyone stood in the courtyard. Rinpoche smiled and asked, "What's the first competition?" "Let's compete in dyeing," Zhang Junjing said. He knew that they would probably lose the competition in brewing wine. If they lost in the first round, they would be looked down upon. It would be better to compete in dyeing. That's settled then. Rinpoche smiled and ordered someone to bring out the dyed cloth from the courtyard. The Zhang family's cloth was taken out first. There were a total of 7 rolls of pure color silk: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue and purple. Because they didn't make it in time, the colors were a little light, and people would feel that the colors weren't right at first glance. Zhang Junjing hurriedly explained, "This cloth takes a long time to dye. There are only 5 days this time, which is definitely not enough time. As a result, the dyeing is somewhat inadequate. As a result, this commoner and Sir Ren are competing in the durability of the colors." "Oh, this is the first time I've heard of it. What about you?" The Empress said faintly, looked at Rinpoche and asked. "They'll be here soon." Rinpoche chuckled as he listened to the footsteps in the courtyard. Then he saw 3 guards coming out with rolls of cloth that looked a lot smaller. Each of the guards was carrying a roll of cloth of 7 different colors: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue and purple. However, the color of the cloth that each guard was carrying was different. They actually dyed 3 different colors of each color. Furthermore, the colors were bright and beautiful. Compared to the cloth sold on the street, the colors were richer. As long as one wasn't blind, one would be able to see the difference at a glance. The eyes of Tu Wan and the other female officials lit up when they saw these rolls of cloth. The other officials didn't have much interest in this competition, but after seeing Zhang Junjing's 7 rolls of silk and Rinpoche's 21 rolls of cotton cloth, they chuckled. It would have been fine if Zhang Junjing hadn't said those words. However, after hearing what he said and comparing the dyed cloth of both parties, Zhang Junjing's words made everyone want to laugh. "Didn't you say that 5 days wasn't enough? Not only did Principal Rin dye the cloth better than the one sold on the market, but he also dyed it in 3 different colors. What else could you say?" As for Zhang Junjing, he was stunned when he saw the cloth that Rinpoche asked his men to carry out. How did the other party do it in 5 days? Furthermore, why were the colors so bright? How many times did they dye it in 5 days to achieve this? What kind of dye did they use? Soon after, he discovered the problem. The cloth that the other party used seemed to have never been seen before. "Sir Rin, can I touch this cloth?" Zhang Junjing cupped his hands. "Of course." Zhang Junjing took a few steps forward and rubbed the cloth with his fingers. Indeed, it was a cloth that he had never seen before. It seemed like the problem was with this cloth. Could it be that this cloth was easy to dye? Thank you very much, Sir Ren. If we were to compare the color of the cloth, I would have already lost this round. However, this time we are comparing the durability of the color after washing, Zhang Junjing said. Although the Zhang family had lost in terms of color, he somewhat regretted not requesting for both parties to use the same cloth. However, the most important factor was the degree of fading after washing. This was the content of the competition. Of course. When two pieces of cloth of the same size were placed in hot water, one of the pots immediately turned red. However, the other pot of water only had a slight change. Zhang Junjing's face turned extremely ugly. That pot of water that turned red was the Zhang family's cloth. Without needing to compare the two pieces of cloth, he knew that the Zhang family had lost the first round of the competition. The Zhang family, who had always had the best cloth, actually lost to the person in front of him, whether it was in terms of color or durability. This was a bigger blow to him than losing the first round. One had to know that the Zhang family had already lost 2 rounds, including the wine brewing. This meant that the Zhang family was inferior to the other party in these 2 categories. Furthermore, these 2 categories were chosen by the Zhang family without the other party's knowledge beforehand. The chances of the other party cheating could be said to be very small. Even the entire Dayo couldn't beat the Zhang family in these 2 categories, let alone in such a short period of time. Chapter 581. Someone bring out the wine, Rinpoche shouted at the guards behind him. The result of the cloth dyeing competition could be seen by the naked eye. Naturally, it was the second round. The Empress's spirits were lifted after hearing Rinpoche's words. Ever since that day she had been thinking about this wine. Unfortunately, there was only a little wine left, so she had to control herself from thinking about it. Otherwise, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to let go and would drink it all. At that time, Rinpoche would definitely lose. Soon after, a guard brought out 3 glass bottles that contained 500 grams of wine. Through the bottles, one could see the amber wine swaying. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche. There didn't seem to be any wine left from that day. In fact, there was only 5 kilograms of wine in that jar. After the Empress drank it, there was only slightly more than 500 grams left. Fortunately, there was still some wine left in the distiller, which produced another 2 kilograms. Sir Ren, can I have a taste? Zhang Junjing looked at the wine bottles that Rinpoche had brought over. He had already given up on this round. Now he just wanted to know how Rinpoche's wine tasted like and how much stronger it was compared to the Zhang family's wine. Rinpoche asked someone to pour a bowl of wine for Zhang Junjing. The amber wine emitted an extremely strong aroma when it was poured out of the bottle. Even the people behind the Empress could smell it, and the sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard. Tong Jingye and Qin Chuan were stunned. After Zhang Junjing took it, he first closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he took a small sip. The mellow and pleasant fragrance entered his mouth, and the sweet fragrance ignited his taste buds along the tip of his tongue. Then he felt as if his throat and stomach were on fire. After a long time, the flames subsided, and traces of cool air soothed the burned part of his throat, immediately making him feel comfortable. I concede defeat. We have lost the second round. Zhang Junjing closed his eyes to savor the aftertaste for a long time before opening them again. There was no need to compete with just this wine alone. Although he was very surprised that they had lost 2 rounds in a row, he was most concerned about the third round. He was confident that they would definitely win the third round. The torsion springs used in the Yun nation's ballistae were made by the Zhang family. He believed that even if someone obtained the Zhang family's springs, they wouldn't be able to make them. There were several unknown materials added to the steel used to make the spring. Even if others knew what these materials were, it would take a long time to figure out the ratio. Not to mention the method of quenching was also a secret. Hichi Hiju, take it out. Following Zhang Junjing's words, Zhang Hechi brought out a tray from the courtyard with 2 torsion springs of the same size, each the size of a fist. In addition, there was a shelf made of wood and metal. Your Majesty the Empress of Dayo, Sir Ren and everyone else, this is the most important product of the Zhang family, the spring. The repeating crossbows made from springs were 100 times better than the crossbow battalion of Great Xia. This spring is the core. If the spring doesn't meet the requirements, the power of this repeating crossbow will be greatly reduced. Zhang Junjing wasn't affected by the previous 2 failures and introduced confidently. He believed that this item would definitely move the Empress. Sir Ren, have you made these springs? Zhang Junjing cupped his fists and smiled. I have made them. Ren Baqin replied. However, the size was somewhat different from Zhang Junjing's. The shelf that Zhang Junjing took out was obviously a simple crossbow that was used to test the tension and elasticity of the torsion spring. However, the size of Ren Baqin's spring didn't match. This was something that he had overlooked previously. It doesn't matter. The size of this crossbow can be adjusted. No matter what the size of your spring is, the Zhang family has a way. Zhang Junjing immediately laughed after hearing Ren Baqin's explanation. That's good. Ren Baqin clapped his hands and a guard immediately came out with a bag. He poured the contents of the bag onto the ground, and with a clanking sound, a pile of springs appeared on the ground. There were at least 100 of them, ranging from the size of a pinky finger to the size of an ordinary person's fist to the size of an aboriginal's fist. Not only were there single-strand torsion springs, but there were also double-strand torsion springs and various other types of torsion springs. When this pile of springs was poured onto the ground like a pile of garbage, everyone in the Zhang family was immediately dumbfounded. Impossible. Zhang Junjing stared at the pile of springs on the ground and almost cried out. He suddenly had the illusion that springs, which were a secret of the Zhang family, were actually everywhere, and only the Zhang family was kept in the dark. Not only him, but even the craftsmen in the east courtyard who were looking over also cried out in surprise. Soon after, a few dark-skinned craftsmen in their 40s or 50s quickly rushed over to the pile of springs and began to examine them. As they examined them, they exclaimed, "This is impossible. How can there be so many of them? How can they be so small and have such elasticity? Look, this is double strand. It turns out that they can be made this way. Originally, if they were made too thin, the tension and elasticity wouldn't be enough. However, this problem can be solved with double or more strands. The combination of these strands can actually reduce the volume of the spring." After exclaiming in surprise, the craftsmen quickly sat on the ground and began to discuss. Looking at the performance of these craftsmen, Zhang Junjing was in a trance. Ren Baqin looked at Zhang Junjing with a smile. In fact, in his opinion, this thing was already common and could be seen almost everywhere. Clocks, cars, doors, locks. Only the Zhang family still treated it like a treasure. Do you still want to compete? Ren Baqin looked amiably at him. Compete. Zhang Junjing squeezed out a word from between his teeth. After that, a craftsman first installed the Zhang family springs on the crossbow and then loaded a short arrow. After that, a guard smashed down the wall, and there was an empty space between the two courtyards. After that, the crossbow was placed on one side and 3 layers of wooden targets were placed on the other side 100 steps away. Next was the test. There was a rocker arm next to the crossbow, and the spring could be twisted by shaking the rocker arm. An arrow was shot on each of the 6 and 9 rounds. The arrow pierced through 1 wooden target on the 6th round and 2 wooden targets on the 9th round. The arrow pierced deeply into the 3rd wooden target. Shaking the crossbow 9 times was the limit that the Zhang family could achieve. The arrows shot from the crossbow could penetrate leather armor from a distance of 200 steps on the ground. The range was double that of Great Xia's crossbow battalion. At present, it could definitely be considered a sharp weapon. Even the high-ranking officials in the imperial court were surprised to see this performance. Hongwu, Shiwanya, and the others had grave expressions on their faces. Previously, they had heard Zi Donglai, the Protector General of the Northeast, mention that the Yun nation now had a ballista that could shoot 100 bolts at a range of 200 steps. They didn't expect this crossbow to be made by the Zhang family. Chapter 582. Many of the people present wanted to laugh and felt inexplicably happy. There was a time when Dayo wanted to send people to other countries to learn things, but they couldn't. But now, Dayo wasn't strong in other aspects other than its military strength. However, those things that were regarded as treasures by other countries weren't so precious in the eyes of Dayo. This was especially true when comparing the treasures of the Zhang family to the pile of rubbish that Ren Baqin had poured out. Although the Zhang family was only a family in the Yun nation, according to Zhang Junjing, they were deeply involved in all aspects of the Yun nation. By defeating the Zhang family in technology, it could also be said that they had defeated the Yun nation in technology in some ways. Sir Ren, please, Zhang Junjing said to Ren Baqin. Zhang Junjing said to Ren Baqin. Now that he had placed all his hopes on this, there was no other way out. Next, he found 2 springs that were about the same size as the ones that the Zhang family had taken out from Ren Baqin's pile. He adjusted the internal dimensions of the crossbow that was as long as an arm and as wide as 2 palms and installed them. Following the first attempt, Zhang Juanjing's heart skipped a beat when he fired the crossbow after swinging the arm 6 times. Although it also shot through a wooden target, the sound produced was much louder than the one at the Jianghu residence, and the crossbow arrow pierced deeper as well. This showed that the elasticity of Rinpoche's spring was better under the same force. This made Zhang Junjing start to panic. He had bet half of the Jianghu family and brought out the best technology of the Jianghu family. If they lost, the consequences would be unimaginable. The others ignored his thoughts and continued to test the torque of 9 revolutions. The bolts shot directly penetrated 3 wooden targets and stuck into the wall behind them. The result was obvious. We've lost. Zhang Juanjing's eyes were a little blank. Could it be that there were really people in this world who knew everything? Could it be that the treasures of the Jianghu family were really ordinary to others? He had always known that the Jianghu family did the best. Even though they weren't well known, this was only because they kept a low profile. Whether it was the advanced crossbows or the various things that people used, they couldn't escape the shadow of the Jianghu family. It could be said that it was almost impossible for a person in the Yun nation to not come into contact with the things made by the Jianghu family from birth to death. This feeling of controlling everyone's lives was like controlling the lives of others, and the Jianghu family had always been extremely proud of it. What made them even more proud was that no one could leave all of this, because the Jianghu family was the best. But these 3 matches made him suddenly feel that the things that the Jianghu family controlled, the things that the Jianghu family was proud of, seemed to be child's play in the eyes of others. The faces of everyone in the Jianghu family were covered with gray. Rinpoche smiled and said a few words to one of the guards beside him. That guard ran over and took out another crossbow. Imitating what the Jianghu family did previously, he loaded the crossbow and rotated the rocker arm until it made 12 revolutions. This caused the eyes of the Jianghu family members to twitch. One had to know that the Jianghu family springs could only be twisted 9 times. Any more than that and it would snap. On the other hand, the opponent's spring had been twisted 12 times. But a series of light sounds could be heard. Not only did the crossbow bolt pierce through 3 of the templates, it even hit the wall behind it and exploded. This power caused the eyes of Hongwu and the others to twitch. This power could reach at least 300 steps away. Previously, Great Xia's crossbow battalion had caused Deyo to lose a lot of blood. If the enemy were to master this kind of crossbow and shoot from a distance of 300 steps, it was unknown how many aboriginal warriors would be sacrificed. Fortunately, this thing was made by Principal Ren. Everyone had to admit that other than his combat strength, nothing could stump Rinpoche. All kinds of strange things could appear in his hands. As for the Jianghu family, this was a scene that made everyone's face turn ashen. A full 12 revolutions of the torsion force. They didn't know how many years it would take for them to catch up. If they were lucky, it might take a few years or more. If they were unlucky, it might take half a lifetime or even a lifetime. Because of a coincidence or inspiration, they were able to improve in a certain aspect. This was because improving the torsion spring technique involved many aspects. Just the breakthroughs in materials and various techniques alone would take many years. And this improvement could be half a revolution, 1 revolution, or even 2 revolutions. A difference of 3 revolutions of torsion force could be said to be like the difference between heaven and earth. A huge breakthrough in a certain aspect was needed to achieve this. If there was a slight difference, everyone could still be somewhat confident. However, the gap in front of them was obvious that the other party was much more brilliant than them. That's all for the competition, the Empress said as she turned around and walked out without saying anything else. Many of the court officials came to watch the show. Now that the show was over, it was time for everyone to leave. After all, it wasn't a battle of knives and sleeves, so this kind of competition wasn't very attractive to everyone. It was far inferior to the battle between Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan at the top of the brothel. However, it wasn't as boring as they imagined. Tu Wan and the others remembered the cloth that Rinpoche died. Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan were still thinking about Rinpoche's wine, and Hongwu, Shiwanya, Li Chenxiu and the people from the Ministry of War paid attention to the thing called the spring that Rinpoche made. Zhang Junjing looked at everyone leaving. He opened his mouth, felt his throat dry and couldn't make a sound. There was only one thing on his mind: half of the Jianghu family, half of the Jianghu family. Mr. Zhang, do you have anything to say now? Rinpoche asked kindly. Zhang Junjing was stunned for a long time. His face twitched a few times before he finally lowered his head and said, I admit defeat. He had no choice but to admit defeat. If he were to go back on his words, not only would his head be on the ground, but the reputation of the Jiang family would also be affected. Who knew how many people would be implicated? The extermination of Yi Ke's entire family in Qingfeng City was enough for everyone to recognize Dai You's methods. It's good that you admit defeat. That will save me some trouble. Ren Baqin laughed. The implied meaning in his words made Zhang Junjing shudder. He recalled the time when Ren Baqin was the Honglu deputy. His methods were very insidious. He was far from being as harmless as he looked on the surface. Actually, you guys have benefited, so you don't have to look so sullen. Come, smile. Ren Baqin laughed casually, but Zhang Junjing and the others couldn't bring themselves to laugh. Go back first and stay for a few days. I will make arrangements for you after Her Majesty's birthday celebration. As for the rest of the Zhang family. Ren Baqin stopped halfway, making Zhang Junjing's heart tighten. Give me the list of names. In the future, those on the list will be from the Zhang family. As for those who aren't on the list, it's better not to be accidentally injured during the battle between the two armies, Ren Baqin said in a soft and hard tone. Sir. Zhang Junjing's face turned ugly. I will give you a chance. Ren Baqin waved his hand and interrupted Zhang Junjing. If you don't give me the list, how will I know who is from the Zhang family? The original bet was up to you to choose the content of the challenge, and you can prepare the materials as you wish. If you win, I will introduce you to Her Majesty. If you lose, you can live a stable life in Dayo and even ask me for advice. You can say that you have taken advantage of me. If you can't show me your sincerity, what's the point of keeping you around? Ren Baqin said faintly. He didn't look at Zhang Junjing anymore, yawned and staggered out of the courtyard. Chapter 583. This bet that determined the fate of many people in the Zhang family set off a storm thousands of miles away. However, it didn't cause much of a stir in Dayo. Even for those court officials who had witnessed it with their own eyes, the fact that he was proficient in all other aspects other than martial arts only left a deeper impression on them. It was only 3 days before the Empress's birthday celebration, and Lan City was starting to get lively. Although there weren't any envoys coming this year and there were still battles in the northeast and southeast, the war didn't affect the residents of Lan City much. It wasn't because they didn't know the hardships at the front line, but because the Aboriginals had been fighting against the heavens, the earth, and all kinds of beasts since they were born decades ago. Fighting was already embedded in their bones, and it wasn't something that could be erased in just a few decades. In addition, 3 cities in the Yun Nation had been conquered recently. Carts of salt were transported back to replenish the salt shortage in Dayo's market. Taking advantage of this batch of salt and the Empress's birthday celebration, a large number of Aboriginals came to the foot of the mountain. Many of them traveled for a few days to Lan City, sweeping away the previous desolation in Lan City. In addition, Hongwu and the rest had also returned recently, and many people would take a look outside Hongwu's residence on the way. Ren Baqin had seen this situation many times. He saw people looking at Hongwu's residence from afar a few times and didn't know what they were talking about. He estimated that these people were probably saying, I can replace you. Or they were saying to their children, Peter can replace you. In this case, Ren Baqin even laughed for a long time after he imagined such a conversation. If someone had such a thought, he would definitely support it. Otherwise, when Hongwu looked at her, he would always look at her with his nose and eyes looking at her. The palace was preparing for the next 3 days. Ren Baqin got people to wrap pieces of red muslin around the trees and tie them into knots. From afar, the palace looked like a sea of red flowers. It's a little wasteful, the Empress said faintly when she saw Ren Baqin's actions. Although she rarely cared about these things, Ren Baqin's actions still made her heart ache. Dayo didn't have the technology to weave cloth. All the cloth was transported from the other 3 nations, and the price wasn't low either. The palace was so big and red flowers were everywhere. This was too extravagant. Do you like it? Ren Baqin asked excitedly. The Empress had never done these things. Other than attending court to deal with political affairs, drinking, daydreaming, and her new hobby of watching television series, she rarely paid attention to other matters. There weren't many guards in this huge palace, and there were even fewer palace maids. It had always been cold and cheerless. After being tormented by him, it became much livelier. The Empress thought about it and liked it. She shifted her gaze to the side and said, It seems like you are going to empty out the palace treasury. Only in this way can I be worthy of His Majesty. Besides, if we use it this year, we can use it next year and the year after that. It won't be considered extravagant anymore. Ren Baqin laughed and said, I have earned some money from selling glass cups and glasses these days. It's barely enough to cover my expenses. Before the opening of this shop, the glass factory had already stored a lot of glass cups. The opening of the royal glass shop had triggered a frenzy of buying. These crystal-clear cups and bowls only cost 15 taels of silver. Which of the big shots in the imperial court wouldn't buy a dozen or 20 of them? In just half a month, the glass shop made more than 30,000 taels of silver, which were used by Rinpoche to purchase red muslin to decorate the palace. After hearing what he said, the Empress didn't say anything else. In fact, most of the time the Empress didn't care about what Rinpoche did. She would only watch quietly from the side and wait for the results. Even though she felt a little cold at times, most of the time, it was a kind of indulgence. Even after watching so many television shows, the Empress didn't know how to express her feelings. In other words, if she expressed her feelings to others, it would make her feel too shy. This kind of indulgence was her way of expressing her feelings. Rinpoche was well aware of this. Therefore he would sometimes deliberately tease the Empress. Of course, most of the time he would be sent flying with a kick from the Empress. 3 days passed in a flash. During these 3 days, all the palace maids and guards were tormented by him. As a result, the color of the entire palace changed. Even when Xenja was patrolling the palace, she would raise her head from time to time to look at the treetops that were full of red flowers. Even though she looked like a man most of the time, in fact there were times when she was meticulous. Rinpoche only finished decorating the entire palace at noon on the day of the Empress's birthday celebration. Rinpoche went back and changed into a set of blue ceremonial robes. This was the color of ceremonial robes for rank 4 officials. At this time last year he was dressed like a prairie. Thinking about it, all of this should have started on this day last year. It was exactly 1 year. Moreover, it was the Empress's birthday celebration. This was a good thing. It saved him the trouble of remembering all kinds of anniversaries. Almost all of them were on this day. If possible, it would be best to set his wedding on this day as well. Rinpoche's thoughts drifted as he rushed to the Empress's palace. The Empress was dressed in a red robe and sitting on a stool. In front of her was the mirror with the words, "If the heavens didn't give birth to your majesty, the ages would be like a long night." Beside her was a dressing table. Meanwhile, Qing Yuan and Hong Luan were helping the Empress dress up. Rinpoche's eyes lit up when he saw the Empress sitting there. There was a golden phoenix spreading its wings on the Empress's red robe. When Rinpoche first returned from Great Xia, he ordered it from a cosplay shop. However, the Empress was wearing it today. In addition, Rinpoche saw that absolutely beautiful and slightly cold side profile. If this painting of a beauty dressing up was drawn, it would definitely be a treasure handed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately, Rinpoche was very confident in his drawing skills. If he drew a painting of a beauty dressing up for the Empress today, he was afraid that he would be beaten to death on a day like this. If Jack on the Titanic had his drawing skills, there wouldn't be so many stories later on. Rinpoche took out his camera and took a picture of this absolutely beautiful scene. Then he walked behind the Empress and carefully watched how Qing Yuan and Hong Luan put the Empress's hair in a bun. Dressing up a beauty was also a pleasure, and Rinpoche was quite interested in learning how to do it. "Are you done with those things?" The Empress looked at Rinpoche behind her in the mirror. He had spent 3.5 days just for this half a day. Although it was very beautiful and she liked it very much, she still felt that Rinpoche was a little too idle. It was time for him to pick up his martial arts skills from tomorrow onwards. "Your Majesty's beauty today is truly heaven-defying." Rinpoche looked at the person in the mirror and exclaimed in admiration. He didn't know if beauty was in the eye of the beholder, but he felt that the Empress was getting more and more beautiful. "If your Majesty's beauty was 9. 8 in the past, it would be 9. 9 today. I gave you 0. 1 less because I was afraid that you would become arrogant." After Rinpoche finished speaking, both Qing Yuan and Hong Luan pursed their lips and laughed. Chapter 584. After the Empress finished grooming, the two of them sat facing each other in the bedroom and smoked e-cigarettes. A large amount of smoke came out of their mouths and enveloped both of them. The reason why the Empress liked e-cigarettes was because they were sweet. Furthermore, they were cold. The two of them ate one mouthful after another as if they were eating snacks. The entire hall was filled with a fruity and milky fragrance. From time to time, the Empress would raise her head to look outside through the glass. She was tempted to go out for a walk, but after thinking about the hot weather outside, she gave up on this idea and stayed in the bedroom peacefully. When Xenja arrived, she could only see their silhouettes at the door. This wasn't the first time she saw such a scene, so she wasn't surprised. After estimating that it was about time, Rinpoche bade farewell and went to check on other arrangements. He only strolled to Xingqing Palace Hall in the evening with his hands behind his back. Whether it was the Empress's birthday celebration or the year-end banquet, they were all held here. Although it was called a palace hall, it was actually a huge palace hall. However, only the main hall was used for banquets and banquets. The other halls had been abandoned for a long time. Even though there were people cleaning them from time to time, they were still a little old. When Rinpoche entered the main hall, many people were looking up and studying the light belts above their heads. Rinpoche could now carry 1,200 kilograms of items at a time, so it was much easier to carry items. During this period of time, he had brought many light belts to install in the main hall. At this moment, the light belts flickered in the air, making the entire main hall look like a fairy tale world. Rinpoche's entrance attracted the attention of some people. After nodding in acknowledgement, he found his seat and began to wait. Occasionally he would chat with Feng Ho. Feng Ho was very interested in the wine and springs that Rinpoche and the Jianghu family had bet on. In particular, the springs that could be made into crossbows would be a great weapon. Unfortunately, such springs couldn't be made in this world yet. Whether it was the materials or the craftsmanship, it couldn't be achieved. As for the wine, Rinpoche was also preparing to build his own winery for the imperial family. After all, the market for hard liquor in this world was huge and the profits were huge. Furthermore, it wasn't suitable to expand in a short period of time. Especially in Dayo, the grain production hadn't reached the point where it could be used to produce wine. Rinpoche was prepared to bring out cotton and textile craftsmanship. After talking to Feng Ho for a while, Guihong also joined in. Rinpoche and a few ministers from the Ministry of Works formed a small circle and whispered to each other, attracting the attention of many people. Unknowingly, Tong Xinye appeared behind them and listened for a long time. He couldn't help but ask, "Principal Rin, do you want to take up a position in the Ministry of Works? It's a pity that you didn't come to the Ministry of Works with your talent." Sir Tong. Rinpoche turned around and greeted him. "As for going to the Ministry of Works, forget it." After another 15 minutes, Shi Qing, Hongwu, Shiwanya, and the others arrived one after another. After they sat down, the Empress, who was dressed in a bright red Han costume, slowly entered the hall with Qing Yuan and Hong Luan. After greeting each other, the Empress took her seat in the seat of honor before slowly sitting down. Following which, the maids outside the hall brought in the dishes one after another. Everyone's gaze immediately fell on Rinpoche's face. The dishes from last year's birthday celebration had left a deep impression on everyone. Many people didn't really have a taste of it that time. As soon as the dishes were served, everyone immediately thought of him. They wanted to see something from his face so that they could be mentally prepared. Rinpoche's good-natured smile made everyone feel more at ease. This year they were all on the same side, so it should be the same as in previous years, right? However, as soon as the first dish was served, everyone's face immediately turned black. There was a whole blood sausage coiled together on a plate. Of course, Rinpoche knew what it was, but the others didn't. Seeing this, they lost their appetite. When the second dish was served, everyone had the urge to draw their knives and hack Rinpoche. There was a neatly roasted sheep's penis and 2 sheep's eggs on the plate. How were they supposed to eat this thing? Were they supposed to let people chew on it? However, this thing didn't taste right no matter how they ate it. Just the thought of everyone in the hall eating the sheep's penis in an orderly manner was too beautiful. Many people craned their necks to look at the Empress and realized that her dishes were completely different from theirs. They immediately stared at Rinpoche with murderous expressions. The third dish was soup. It was a copper bowl with a bat the size of 2 palms swimming in it. This bat soup immediately made everyone lose their appetite. The fourth dish looked pretty good and smelled very fragrant. Everyone looked at the food in the bowl with uncertainty. The food in the bowl seemed to be edible, right? In fact, this dish was considered a famous dish. When Rinpoche saw it for the first time, he couldn't eat it. However, after being persuaded by others to eat it, he realized that it tasted pretty good. The fifth dish, a bowl of raw beef mince. The sixth dish, a crooked roasted water snake. Seeing the sixth dish, everyone finally felt that there was at least one dish that was edible this year. Then they continued to stare at Rinpoche with murderous eyes. "Are you trying to pick a fight with us? Are you not done yet?" Rinpoche felt rather wronged. This year he only provided 3 dishes on the menu, which were the braised meat, roasted sheep's penis, and blood sausage. The other dishes, such as the bat soup, raw beef mince, and roasted water snake, were all developed by the Imperial Kitchen. He didn't know if the Imperial Kitchen had chosen the wrong skill, but they actually developed several types of dark cuisine. Usually, the dishes made by the Imperial Kitchen were eaten by the Empress and Rinpoche. Even if they developed something, there was no one to share it with. Now that there were so many people present at the Empress's birthday celebration, they brought out all their tricks. This time it really didn't have much to do with him. At most, it was only 50% related. The Empress looked at everyone's expressions, looked at the food on the table, and then looked at her own. She then ignored them. In any case, the food that she ate didn't seem to have any problems. Following that was the inscription. It wasn't too innovative and was just a routine. Rinpoche took the opportunity to look around the hall. As expected, Li Fu didn't come. In any case, Li Fu was the world's most powerful expert, and it was reasonable to invite him. He didn't know if Li Fu really didn't like this kind of environment, or if he didn't want to see Qin Chuan, Tong Jinye, Tu Wan, and the others. He directly rejected the invitation. Just now he sent someone to invite him again, but it seemed that he didn't come. After the Empress drank the first cup of wine, a group of young Jing tribe girls entered the hall and danced. These young Jing tribe girls all had silver bells hanging on their waists. As they danced, the silver bells rang continuously and were extremely pleasing to the ear. Their dance was also different from the wildness of the Aboriginal girls. It was filled with a gentle beauty and had a different kind of flavor. At least Rinpoche quite liked this kind of dance. It looked good whether they wore clothes or not. Chapter 585. The jade egg that Hong Wu presented last year could be considered a rare treasure. The 100 Beauties painting was also considered pretty good. Naturally, there was also the mirror that Rinpoche presented. Rinpoche didn't know if there would be another gift like last year. Many people looked at Hong Wu first. According to the usual practice, Hong Wu would present his gift first. Some people also looked at Rinpoche. He had a lot of strange things and they didn't know what he could take out. The general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hong Wu, presents 100 sets of armor and 2,000 sabers. The gift wasn't as expensive as last year's, but it wasn't cheap either. 100 sets of armor were worth 10,000 gold, and 2,000 sabers were not cheap either. This gift was worthy of Hong Wu's status. It was just that the things that Hong Wu took out last year were too shocking, so it was inevitable that everyone had a little hope in their hearts. However, Hong Wu had been stationed at the border for a year and couldn't move at all. All his thoughts were on Great Xia and he didn't have the energy to search for rare treasures for the Empress. Great Elder Shi presents 3 pieces of Mongolian beast skin and 2 stalks of green sunflower. Junior Elder Zhikohai presents 3 tails of cloud crystals. Everyone turned their heads to take a look. 3 tails of cloud crystals were priceless. They didn't expect that Zhikohai's gift this year would be much more valuable than Hong Wu's and Shi Qing's. However, Zhikohai's expression didn't change in the slightest, and the crowd couldn't see anything from his expression. Next were the congratulatory gifts from the 6 ministers, Shi Wanya and Li Qianqiu. Basically, they were all rare treasures, similar in value to the items Shi Qing had taken out. Most of the items sent were directly stored in the warehouse. Only 1 or 2 items were left for display. The other rare treasures were displayed in front of the hall before being sent to the inner treasury. The principal of the Black Bamboo Academy, Rinpoche, presents the Heaven's Proud Beauty painting. Following the voice, 2 people carrying a 6-meter-tall, 3-meter-wide painting appeared in front of the hall. In the painting, a woman in red stood on a high peak with her hands behind her back, looking down calmly. Everyone could see the cold and threatening aura coming from the woman in the painting. This painting naturally depicted the Empress. The heavenly beauty was also referring to the Empress. This was the proper meaning. However, the most surprising thing was that the Empress in the painting looked like a real person. It was impossible to tell that it was a painting. People had always said that it was lifelike, but after seeing this painting, everyone knew what it meant. It wasn't drawn, it was printed. Everyone exclaimed in admiration. They didn't know how Rinpoche did it. At a glance, the Empress could tell that the painting was a photograph. This made her slightly disappointed. She originally thought that he would be able to come up with something that she liked, but she didn't expect that it would just be an enlarged photograph. Although the angle of the photo was very good and she was very beautiful in the photo, she could naturally fool others. However, she had seen a lot of people on Earth. Even she would use her phone to take photos. However, when she thought about how Rinpoche had been preparing for the bet with the Jianghu family and how he had been busy decorating the palace, she decided to put this matter aside for now. "Your Majesty, there's more to this painting than that." Rinpoche stood up and smiled. "Oh." The Empress's eyes lit up. The rest of the people also revealed looks of interest as they carefully examined the painting, trying to figure out the mystery behind it. Rinpoche gestured for someone to bring in the painting. The painting, which was 6 meters tall, was even taller than the door of the palace hall. They had to lift it halfway to bring it into the palace hall. As the painting got closer, everyone began to realize that there were thin lines on the painting that divided it into lattices. This was a painting that was pieced together by the lattices. When the painting passed in front of everyone exclaimed when they saw the back of the painting. This made the people in front curious. What exactly did they see? Rinpoche asked someone to hold the painting 4 meters in front of the Empress and slowly turned it around. When she saw the north side of the painting, even the Empress revealed a look of surprise. Her eyes sparkled like a lake that was blown by the wind. Behind the painting were palm-sized photos of the Empress. Every frown, every smile and every frown were included. Countless palm-sized photos were all of the Empress. Rinpoche chuckled. On the back of this painting were 1,200 photos of the Empress, and on the front was a picture of the Empress that was formed by 1,200 jigsaw puzzles. The back of each photo was a jigsaw puzzle piece. More importantly, the 1,200 photographs in this painting were arranged in chronological order. Almost all of the Empress's changes over the past year could be seen in them. Even a blind person would be able to tell that the closer to the bottom of the painting, the gentler the Empress's expression became, and the coldness from her body became less. Even a blind person could see these changes. In the eyes of others, this painting could already be said to be priceless. Even though the Empress knew that these were photos, she also felt that Rinpoche had put in a lot of thought into it. She had spent almost all her time on these photos, as if they represented her life over the past year. This feeling was very wonderful. In addition, this painting also hides a secret, Rinpoche continued. After hearing what he said, everyone was curious. This painting could already be said to be exquisite, and they didn't know what other secrets were hidden in it. I have hidden all my life's knowledge in this painting. After this, I will divide this painting into 1,200 pieces and distribute them throughout Dayo and even the Yun nation so that everyone in the world can see your Majesty's face. If someone collects these 1,200 pieces, they will be able to find the location where I have hidden all my life's knowledge and obtain it. Rinpoche winked at the Empress at the end of his speech. The Empress didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and the little bit of emotion she felt earlier had completely disappeared. Did you find a place to hide a set of mathematics, physics, and chemistry textbooks and then let the whole world search for them? Let's not talk about the possibility of someone collecting all 1,200 pieces. If someone really collected all 1,200 pieces and found the mathematics, physics, and chemistry textbooks, they would probably beat you to death. However, except for the Empress, everyone else found it very interesting. Even though Rinpoche's martial arts weren't good, everyone could see his other abilities. They also recognized him. If someone could really learn all of Rinpoche's knowledge, he might really be able to make a career out of it. It was just a pity for this exquisite painting. I have also prepared some things that your Majesty should like. After the ceremony, your Majesty and all the officials can follow me out to see the things that I have prepared. For the rest of the time, everyone didn't have the mood to think about what else Rinpoche had prepared. They had to admit that Rinpoche was really clever. At least, no one could have imagined that he could actually do this with that painting. After the ceremony, everyone followed Rinpoche to the open space behind Xingqing Palace Hall and saw that the ground was filled with all kinds of things. Once the Empress saw the things on the ground, she knew what Rinpoche had prepared. Your Majesty, it's your turn to light it. Rinpoche took a torch from a guard and handed it to the Empress. He then pointed to a thin line on the ground. The Empress lit the fuse on the ground. A spark quickly rolled on the ground and then scattered to dozens of fireworks. Bang! Fireworks rose into the sky, blooming with colorful lights in the sky. The entire Lan city was alarmed by the fireworks at this moment. Countless people were alarmed by the colorful flowers that suddenly bloomed in the sky. Look, it's flowers. What beautiful flowers. It's on top of the palace. One by one, people walked out of their houses and looked up at the fireworks that appeared in the sky of Dayo for the first time. The fireworks also lit up everyone's faces. Everyone was amazed by the beauty of the fireworks. Balls of light soared up from the palace and bloomed in the sky. In the palace, in addition to the fireworks that soared into the sky, there were also many fireworks on the ground. It was magnificent and magnificent, stunning everyone. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan followed behind the Empress and looked at the fireworks in the courtyard and the fireworks in the sky with ripples in their eyes. The Empress was completely immersed in this sea of fireworks. Chapter 586. The Empress's birthday celebration this time was sensational. The commoners didn't know anything about the palace, but they saw the blooming fireworks in the sky. This was the first time everyone had experienced such beauty. Many people in the city were looking up at the flowers in the night sky, admiring their beauty. Until the next day, many people were still discussing what the flowers that appeared in the palace were. However, another explosive piece of news came out very quickly. Ren Baqin, the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy, had hidden everything he had learned in a painting. He then divided the painting into 1,200 pieces and sent them out of the city. As long as someone found these 1,200 paintings, they would be able to find out what Principal Ren had learned in them. Do you want fame, wealth, and status? Do you want to know the mysteries of this world? If you want, I can give them to you. Go and find them. I have placed everything there. This sentence was heard by many people. The most interesting part was the phrase, the mysteries of this world, which made many people daydream. However, the ones who were most interested weren't the Aboriginals but the Zhang family. When this news came out, Zhang Junjing immediately inquired about the whereabouts of the paintings. However, this was Dayo and not the Yun nation. The Zhang family was powerless even if they wanted to. Next was the Jing tribe, who had a higher degree of recognition toward Ren Baqin. After coming out, they heard many rumors about Ren Baqin and were very interested in everything he said. It was a pity that the Jing tribe only had influence in Tianjin Basin. As for the Aboriginals, their minds were still focused on their fists. However, each of the 1,200 paintings was a portrait of His Majesty, and many people were tempted by them. It was every Aboriginal's wish to obtain a portrait of the Empress as a treasure. As a result, Ren Baqin's joke really caused quite a commotion. On the second day of class, 3 idiots immediately asked for leave. The world is so big and I want to see. Oh no, I want to find the treasure map. Then these 3 idiots were hung on the flagpole by Ren Baqin. Teacher, what was that in the sky last night? Many people looked at Ren Baqin with sparkling eyes, especially those female students. Even Tong Lan was the same. Beautiful things were more attractive to women. Fireworks, fireworks, fireworks. You will learn about it in the future. Ren Baqin smiled as he stood on the podium. When the students heard this, they immediately became excited. This was much more interesting than mechanics and optics. Even many male students wanted to find a girl and then put such fireworks in front of her. Would anyone be able to reject them? By the way, I will bring a new teacher to you tomorrow. Be mentally prepared, Ren Baqin said before the class ended. A new teacher? Everyone was astonished. Yes, new teacher, you will like it. Alright, school is over. Ren Baqin strolled back home. The robot company had promised to deliver the goods in 3 months, but it took a full 8 months before they finally delivered the goods the last time he went back. If they still didn't deliver the goods, Ren Baqin was prepared to show them why the flowers were so red. However, after receiving the goods, Ren Baqin felt that his 8 months of waiting hadn't been in vain. However, he still needed to bring back a lot of fireworks, so the robot was temporarily placed in the room. When he returned to Dayo the next morning, not only was there a robot by his side but there was also a flying motorcycle. Over the past 2 years, Earth's technology had progressed very quickly. It could be said that after the Industrial Revolution, the progress of technology was getting faster and faster. Recently, it had already reached the point where a person who had left society for a few years would find himself completely obsolete and unable to understand many things around him. 2 years ago there were only trials of driverless buses, but this year they could already be seen in many places. Identity cards had become cell phones. The bank had also become an unmanned bank, completely intelligent. The speed of change was so fast that even Ren Baqin found it a little strange. The same was true for flying motorcycles. The earliest flying motorcycles could only fly for 40 minutes and were at a height of 4 to 5 meters. The latest model that Ren Baqin had gotten his hands on could already fly for 2 hours and was at a height of 8 meters. Ren Baqin couldn't help but get one to play with. After returning to Dayo, Ren Baqin rode the flying motorcycle above the palace and headed toward the Empress's quarters. When the flying motorcycle rose into the sky, the guards of Pingle Park were shocked. However, they knew that it was Ren Baqin and didn't have any extreme reactions. Soon after, they were dumbfounded as they watched Ren Baqin fly away in the sky. However, not long after Ren Baqin flew, he heard someone shouting in front of him, Who are you? Come down. Soon after, a figure with a bright sword slashed at him. This scene almost scared him to death, and he hurriedly shouted loudly, finally letting the other party recognize his identity. However, it was easy to draw the sword but difficult to retract it. The other party finally managed to retract the sword in midair, but he couldn't stabilize his body and collided with Ren Baqin. After a series of chaotic sounds, the flying motorcycle crashed to the ground. Ren Baqin and Xanja collided into each other and fell to the ground in a daze. Xanja jumped out of Ren Baqin's arms in panic. Soon after, she calmed down and glared at Ren Baqin. Sir Ren, next time you do such strange things, at least let me know first. I can retract the sword this time, but I can't retract it every time. Ren Baqin lay on the ground and felt pain all over his body as if it had fallen apart. He couldn't even feel the warm and fragrant body in his arms at all. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He was riding the flying motorcycle and was almost struck down by someone. This time he finally understood Green Bead's feelings when she was shot down by the Empress. Flying was dangerous and one had to be cautious when taking off. I say, can't you take a good look before you strike someone? It's only a few meters high and at such a slow speed. You can't possibly not see it, right? Ren Baqin complained. Xanja stood in front of Ren Baqin. Her expression changed a few times before she snorted and said, I can't even see things 10 steps away. Therefore, Sir Ren should be more careful in the future. Are you nearsighted? Ren Baqin was surprised. He didn't expect nearsightedness to exist in this world. Even though he hadn't interacted much with Xanja in the past, they had met quite a few times in the palace. This was the first time he knew that she had a vision problem. What was even more surprising was that she could actually become the commander of the palace guards with a vision problem. Xanja snorted and walked away with a black face. Even though she didn't know what Ren Baqin was talking about, she could keenly sense that he was talking about her vision problem. After all, Ren Baqin said the word vision. Ren Baqin lay on the ground and thought about Tingyu. Even a blind person could become the third most powerful expert in the world. It wasn't surprising that Xanja became the commander of the palace guards. After Xanja left, Ren Baqin was sent back to Pingle Park dejectedly by the guards. Not long after, the Empress received the news and came over to see him. She wanted to laugh when she saw that his head was wrapped in bandages. She then said with a smile, Xanja's vision isn't very good. Next time, let her know if there's anything and this won't happen. She should be able to get a pair of myopia glasses, right? Ren Baqin asked thoughtfully. I don't really understand. There's no such thing as myopia in Dayo. However, you can bring her over to see if there's a solution. The Empress cared a lot about this loyal and devoted commander of the palace guards. It would be great if Xanja could regain her vision. Chapter 587. After taking the medicine, the bandage on Ren Baqin's head could finally be removed. However, his arm was still in a splint. Even if he were to use the ointment from this world, it would still take a few days to recover from the fracture. He then asked someone to carry the robot's box to the academy. Although this would damage his prestige as a great teacher, it couldn't be helped. When Ren Baqin arrived, all the students were there discussing the new teacher who would be coming today and why Yague was late. This was the first time since the establishment of the academy that he was late. Many people guessed that it had something to do with the new teacher. When Ren Baqin arrived with a splint on his arm, all the students looked a little strange. Ren Baqin was in the palace every day, and with his status, no one dared to offend him. How could his arm be broken? Needless to say, it was most likely done by Her Majesty. Ren Baqin immediately became the image of a victim of domestic violence in the eyes of all the students. Well, it was delightful and satisfying. Open the box. Ren Baqin asked the guard to open the box, revealing a white and blue armored Gundam. It was about 2 meters tall and weighed about 160 kilograms, which was about the same as an ordinary person. The weight was mainly in the core, and the outside was only a layer of steel frame and iron sheet. Ren Baqin pressed the back of the robot's head, and it emitted a sound similar to a computer case. Then its eyes turned blue. You will be their teacher in the future. Get to know them, Ren Baqin said. My name is Gundam. An electronically synthesized voice came from the robot's body, and it slowly stood up from its original position of hugging its knees. What a beautiful armor, many students immediately exclaimed. Teacher, is it human? Some people were puzzled because the Gundam's movements were very strange and stiff. No matter how they looked at it, it wasn't because of the layer of armor. Although these students didn't have the concept of a robot, they could easily see that it didn't have a trace of vitality. Whether it's human or not, it's your teacher and can answer your questions. Therefore, you need to respect it as a teacher, Rinpoche said as he stood on the podium. Now you can ask some questions that you have encountered in the process of learning and let it answer them. After hearing Rinpoche's words, everyone suddenly realized that this thing really didn't seem to be human. But what exactly was this iron armor? He didn't give a lecture for half a day, allowing the students to ask Gauda any question they wanted. Gauda used the information stored in the database to answer them. Rinpoche listened for a while and had a rough idea of what was going on. Without being able to connect to the internet, the Gundam lost a large portion of its learning ability. Its answers were very stiff and were completely based on the information it had stored beforehand. There were textbooks and some articles from other sources. But the good thing was that it could also give some examples to illustrate the situation. Therefore, although it wasn't flexible enough, it was enough for now. The Gundam didn't move for the entire morning. If it only answered questions, it wouldn't consume too much battery. By the time school ended, it still had 30% battery left. That morning, many students were very excited but also very puzzled. Such a novel teacher would naturally make them feel excited. As for their doubts, they realized that the Gundam's communication with them didn't feel intelligent at all. It was very inflexible, but it was able to answer many questions. This made many students puzzled. When school was over, they still circled around the Gundam, reaching out to touch its outer shell. Go back, all of you. This is your teacher. You must respect him. Is it right for each of you to touch it? Do you think you are going to a brothel? Rinpoche's face darkened as he chased everyone back. He got someone to move the Gundam to another room. Just as Rinpoche entered, Li Fu followed him in a flash. He looked at the Gundam curiously and asked, "What is this thing?" "It can be considered as an auxiliary tool," Rinpoche replied after thinking for a while. "It's interesting. This thing can actually speak and even answer questions. If it wasn't for the fact that it doesn't have any signs of life, I would have thought that it was some kind of species. However, to be able to make such a thing, it can be considered a superb workmanship." Li Fu clicked his tongue in admiration. This thing couldn't even fool the students, let alone the world's #1 expert, Li Fu. "I'm just curious. How exactly does this thing speak and answer questions?" Li Fu circled around the Gundam a few times and reached out with his dirty big hands to touch its body. "Senior, if you continue to stay in Dayo, you will know how to do it in the future." Rinpoche laughed. "Senior, when are you going to teach me that godly rod? Where is the heaven that you promised me?" "This kid is full of lies," Li Fu immediately spat. "This thing can't be made just like that, right? I'm already preparing it." "Just wait for a few months," Rinpoche said. "In that case I will wait. If you continue to make such a mess every day, I will find trouble with you." Li Fu thought about it and touched the Gundam again before leaving with a look of admiration on his face. Rinpoche pondered for a while after Li Fu left. With his strength he could bring a hot air balloon back. However, it wasn't completely impossible to make a hot air balloon in this world. If it was possible, he would rather make things that could be made in this world. After all, this was the only way for technology to progress little by little. If even things like hot air balloons were to be brought over from Earth, there wouldn't be much meaning. The cloth was relatively easy to make as long as it was sturdy enough. In any case, he wasn't going to make this hot air balloon fly into outer space. As long as it could make Li Fu go around in the sky, it would be fine. The main problem was the airtightness of the hot air balloon. This required him to find a rubber-like substance in this world and apply a layer of it on the cloth to achieve such an effect. Rinpoche immediately went to the Ministry of Works to look for Tong Jinye and asked him to help find something that was similar to rubber. Over the next few days, even though there wasn't much progress on the rubber aspect, the bunch of stupid students at the academy finally made a decent steam engine. Although it was a relatively primitive steam engine that was used to lift water, this was already a breakthrough. Furthermore, this was a reciprocating power machine that converted the energy of steam into mechanical work. Its appearance in this world could be said to be an important step forward. Rinpoche immediately summoned the Empress and the big shots of the Imperial Court to Black Bamboo Academy to see the results of these students. When they heard that the Empress and the big shots of the Imperial Court would be coming, many of the students were so excited that their faces turned red. One had to know that other than Tong Lan and Shurgan, the rest were commoners and people who weren't valued by their families. Before entering the academy, they could already be considered as people who had been abandoned. When had they ever been valued so highly? Not only would the Empress be coming, but the big shots of the imperial court would also be coming. One couldn't blame them for putting the Empress first. It was simply too easy for Ren Baqin to invite the Empress. On the contrary, the arrival of the big shots of the imperial court made them feel that they were valued even more. Chapter 588. Straighten your backs. Even though you are only students of the academy and don't have an official position, you are already the pioneers of this world. You still don't know what this steam engine will bring. However, after a few years or more, you will be remembered in the history of this world. Each and every one of you will be remembered in the history books by future generations. Your greatness is second only to mine, and my greatness is second only to Her Majesty. Ren Baqin said resolutely to the students in front of him. The carriage of the Empress and the ministers was only 10 minutes away from the academy. However, he saw that the students were feeling apprehensive after the excitement and didn't know if this steam engine would be appreciated by those big shots. After all, the function of this steam engine was to lift water, and Tong Lan could lift water much faster than the steam engine. However, Ren Baqin understood the value and significance of the steam engine better than all of them. The Industrial Revolution began on Earth after the invention of the steam engine. Even though the technology of this world hadn't reached this stage, the steam engine was only a toy for the people of the academy. However, under his impetus, the Industrial Revolution would inevitably come. The students subconsciously puffed out their chests when they heard what he said, but burst out laughing when they heard the last sentence. Even though your talents, in the traditional view of the Aboriginals, aren't at the junior high level and can even be classified as trash. However, you have to remember that there are many fists as big as a casserole and they are everywhere. There aren't many people who can use their brains. Those who use their brains govern others, and those who use their strength govern others, Ren Baqin continued. Teacher, do you think it's mental or physical? Shurgan asked. What do you think? Of course it's mental. Ren Baqin glanced at him and saw the smirk on his face. What about Her Majesty? It's also mental. Then why is teacher the one who governs others? Tong Lan asked with glowing eyes. It looked like they would jeer if he didn't give a good answer. Of course it's because Her Majesty is wise and brave. Ren Baqin grinned. He couldn't possibly say that the key was that the Empress's fists were bigger. No matter where, force was very useful. The group of people laughed when they heard this. How do we compare to the scholars of Great Xia? A student asked. What the teacher teaches is different from what they teach. There are many types of scholars in Great Xia. Some of them are frivolous, while some of them govern the people and rule the world. As for you, you are the ones who push the world forward at a rapid pace and scare everyone off. When you open your eyes every day, you will see a different world. Ren Baqin rubbed his chin and thought about the scholars in ancient China. On one hand it was politics. On the other hand it was technology. No matter from which angle he looked at it, he felt that technology was more useful, especially for a world. Only technology could make this world different. Sir Ren is so ambitious. This old man wants to see what a new world looks like when I open my eyes every day. Tong Jinya's voice could be heard from outside the wall. He didn't know what kind of ears he had to be able to hear from so far away. Ren Baqin waved his hand at the students, put his hands behind his back, and went to the entrance of the academy to welcome everyone. He saw Tong Jinya and Qin Xuan riding their mounts in front of him and looking at each other in disdain. He really didn't know how these two, the Minister of Works and the Minister of War, behaved as if they hated each other for stealing their wives. Behind them was the Empress's carriage. The other court officials were behind the Empress. As for Exanger and the other bodyguards, they were left far behind. Thinking about it, this group of people didn't need protection from others. It was already good enough that they didn't collect protection fees from others. Other than Li Fu, anyone who saw such a group of Cardinal Heaven experts would feel their scalp go numb. What good stuff do you have for us to see today? Tong Jinya winked when he saw Ren Baqin from afar. Qin Xuan also nodded as a form of greeting. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, sirs. The Empress moved and appeared in front of the steps of the academy. She raised her head to look at the signboard of the academy and the surrounding walls. She rarely came here. The last time she was here, the walls were made of red bricks. Now there were many green vines climbing up the walls and the red bricks, making them look much better. Let us see your results, the Empress said to Ren Baqin. Although she didn't really understand the steam engine, she had heard Ren Baqin talk about its importance during their daily chats. It could be said to be the beginning of modern industry on Earth. As a result, she was looking forward to seeing this steam engine. Your Majesty, sirs, please? Ren Baqin glanced at the crowd. Shi Qing and the others were among them. Many of them had unwelcome children in the academy, and they wanted to see what these children had learned over the past 9 months. The so-called academy had always been a courtyard and a few houses, and it was still the same even now. Although the layer of vines made the academy look less simple and crude, it still looked like a primary school in the mountains to Ren Baqin. It could be said to be the simplest academy. The students in the courtyard were all gone. Ren Baqin led everyone to the backyard and saw a small pond with dozens of students standing near a strange thing. That thing was mainly made up of a large iron bucket, a wooden barrel, a wooden box, a mess of pipes and wooden poles, and a huge wheel. Is this what you made in a month? Tong Jingye moved closer to Ren Baqin and whispered. However, his whisper was almost the same as shouting at the top of his lungs, and everyone heard him. Tong Lan's face immediately turned black. In any case, they took more than a month to make this thing, but they were actually ridiculed by their grandfather. It's not me, it's them, Ren Baqin said, which made everyone's faces turn even darker. Just now, they said that they were pioneers and would be remembered in history. How could they cast them aside so quickly? They used to call her Xiao Tiantian and now they were calling her Madame Niu? However, don't underestimate this steam engine. The appearance of the steam engine here represents the beginning of a new era, Ren Baqin said. Demonstrate it, the Empress said faintly. Let them experience it. Ren Baqin turned his head and said to Tong Lan and the others. Previously, everyone was already prepared and filled the big iron bucket with water. When Ren Baqin said to start, they started a fire under the bucket to boil the water. Immediately, smoke billowed in the courtyard. Are they preparing to take a bath? Tong Jingye grinned. Sir Tong, you should just watch quietly. Ren Baqin shook his head. The others were also waiting to see what tricks they could play. Chapter 589. Hey, it's moving. Many people looked at the rotating flywheel and clicked their tongues. Obviously, no one moved those things, but the wooden rods and wheels actually moved on their own. As the water temperature began to approach the boiling point, the rods and flywheel rotated faster and faster, and the exhaust pipe of the cylinder began to emit red steam. The flywheel also began to coil the rope and lift the bucket that was previously placed in the pond. When it reached a certain height, the students would pour the water out and throw it back into the pond, repeating the process. This thing is actually moving on its own. Many ministers walked over to watch and found it interesting. After all, it didn't require manpower and could move on its own, which was quite novel. However, after more than 10 minutes of novelty, everyone lost interest. But what's the use of this? Someone began to raise doubts. Tong Jingye immediately shouted, You made this toy after more than a month? Although it looked quite novel, if they were to carry water, it would be much faster for them to do it themselves. Even the water wheel that you made previously is more useful than this. That's right. It looks interesting, but it's not very useful. The others were also making comments. They were somewhat astonished that Ren Baqin had created such a thing. This didn't really match his status. The things that Ren Baqin made in the past were quite surprising. How did he make such a thing with such great fanfare this time and even invited everyone to see it? Old man, that's why I said that you have a long beard but short of knowledge. Is this a matter of a toy? Qin Chuan immediately mocked. However, his words also ridiculed a group of people. Many of the officials present glared at him as there were many bald and bearded officials present. What do you understand now? Tong Jingye snorted. Qin Chuan had the attitude of opposing anything that Tong Jingye agreed with and vice versa. This toy is quite interesting. The most important thing is that it was made by so many people. Previously, these students were just drinking and fooling around, but now they can make something like this. Not bad, not bad. Tong Jingye almost burst out laughing after hearing Qin Chuan's words. Ren Baqin's face immediately turned black. This old man might as well not have said anything. He turned to look at the group of students and saw that many of them looked gloomy. Obviously, the words of Qin Chuan and Tong Jingye had dealt a huge blow to the students who had finally made their first steam engine after more than a month. As for the others, most of their thoughts were similar to Tong Jingye's. Originally, when these students entered the school, they said that he was going to teach them the principles of all things in the world. Everyone was looking forward to it. But from the looks of it now, it was just SOSO. When Ren Baqin saw everyone's reaction, he was displeased. After thinking for a while, he realized his mistake. The role of the steam engine was very important, but these people did not understand it at all. Without the knowledge of the later generations, How could they understand what the steam engine represented? You can only see that this thing can carry water, but this is just a prototype. In fact, this thing can do a lot of things. For example, you don't need a horned cow to drag a truck. Isn't that still a toy? We have countless horned cows in Dayo. If we can use them to pull the chariot, why do we need to use this thing? Tang Xinye really couldn't understand why Rinpoche wanted to do this. One had to know that the solar furnace he had created in the past had played a huge role as it could directly smelt iron ores. There was also well salt, which allowed Dayo to produce its own salt. Cement and red bricks also played a big role. Nowadays, the new steel-making furnaces outside the city were all made of cement and red bricks. They could also be used to build the city walls and houses. Compared to cutting rocks in the past, it saved a lot of manpower. But now he really couldn't see any use for this thing. Not only him but the others also deeply agreed with what he said. Only the old fox, Shi Qin, looked at Rinpoche and gave him an unfathomable smile. The biggest role of the steam engine isn't just limited to one place, but it represents a new source of power. It can replace human and animal power. Whether it was smelting, mining, or transporting goods, they originally required a lot of human and animal power to achieve. On the other hand, the steam engine can reduce human and material power to the minimum and increase speed to a higher level. This is the true meaning of the steam engine. For example, with the steam engine we can develop a train. This thing can transport goods and people. Its speed is several times faster than the horned cows, and the load it can carry isn't something that the horned cows can compare to. One train can carry goods that can be pulled by hundreds or thousands of horned cows. How much manpower will be needed to pull goods from hundreds or thousands of horned cows? How much will the journey cost? How long will it take to reach the protectorate of the Northeast from here? As long as we improve the steam engine and create a train, it can travel day and night without stopping. Originally, it would take half a month to deliver goods, but now it will only take 3 days. If we mobilize rations and troops during wartime, what kind of advantage will this be? Rinpoche said with a black face. He was actually looked down upon by this old man. He was actually looked down upon by a group of primitive people. This was simply unbearable. Is it like what you said? Tang Xinye asked suspiciously. Rinpoche gritted his teeth and wanted to give this old man a kick. Have I ever lied before? You always lie. Tang Xinye replied without hesitation. When have I ever lied? That solar furnace and other things, which of them didn't achieve the effect that I said? Rinpoche's eyes widened and he really wanted to kick Tang Xinye's crotch. Old man, do you know that this is slander? Previously you said that you would invite me to Yenyun restaurant. Tang Xinye stroked his beard with a look that said, you lied to me. The Empress's face turned green as she sent him flying with a kick. She then looked at Rinpoche with an unfriendly look. Qin Chuan grinned and laughed heartily. He was happy to see that old man in trouble. I really don't like to go to brothels, but he insisted on dragging me there. I had no choice but to brush him off. This is called a white lie. Rinpoche had a look of grievance on his face. The Empress glared at him and said, when will you be able to realize those things that you said? After all, you can't see anything from this. She had some understanding of the train that Rinpoche mentioned, but the others couldn't imagine it at all. Only by making it for everyone to see would they change their minds. If it's fast, we can make a small steam train in 1 or 2 months. After we succeed, we can enlarge it and make a real train, Rinpoche said after thinking for a while. It wasn't difficult to make a small steam locomotive. As long as the steam engine was modified and the flywheel driven by the connecting rod was replaced by the train wheels, it would be done. It could be said that it was very easy for him to make it, but it would take some time for the students to do it. However, this kind of thing had to be done by the students so that they could grow. Therefore, Rinpoche's goal was to first modify the steam engine into a small locomotive that could run. Then he would enlarge it according to the scale. In this way, after making the steam engine and the locomotive, the students would have a considerable understanding of the steam engine and physics. In the future, they would be able to learn or do other things much faster. In that case, I will wait to see all of you come up with the thing that you mentioned. The Empress nodded. Following which, she looked at the students who looked a little sad and said, do it well. The future of Dayo depends on all of you. After hearing what the Empress said, many of the officials were a little surprised. One had to know that these words weren't said casually. They didn't expect the Empress to value these things so much that she actually said, the future of Dayo depends on all of you. In their hearts, the future of Dayo was still in the hands of the talented children of the various families. Chapter 590. I heard that you have something that looks like a human and is wrapped in iron. Where is it? Let me take a look. Tong Jingye stayed behind and whispered to Rinpoche. He wasn't interested in the steam engine, but he was very interested in the robot from the academy. He had heard Tong Lan talk about it many times. That's Teacher Gauda from the academy, Rinpoche said with a black face. Rinpoche said with a black face. In any case, the steam engine created by his own student was of great significance to him. However, the others didn't think much of it. This made him feel a little embarrassed. At this moment he especially disliked the two old fellows, Tong Jingye and Qin Chuan. Where is it? Even if it's a teacher, I still want to take a look. Tong Jingye laughed. He's been in seclusion recently and won't be receiving guests. Rinpoche decisively refused. Just to take a look. You have quite a lot of good stuff except for that toy. Tong Jingye recalled what Tong Lan said before and felt like a cat was scratching his heart. However, Rinpoche's face darkened even more after hearing that last sentence. I already said that I won't be receiving guests. You want to see him? Wait for next time. Rinpoche chased Tong Jingye out. He turned around and went back to one of the rooms, only to see Li Fu touching the Gauda like a pervert who had seen a beauty. These days, Li Fu would come and touch it every day, which made Rinpoche feel disgusted. When he returned to the backyard, many students were cooling and inspecting the steam engine. Stop what you're doing. Rinpoche stood nearby and said. Everyone immediately put down what they were doing and listened to him. Did you hear what was said just now? Rinpoche asked. Her Majesty said that the future of Dayo depends on us. Du Laolu couldn't stop laughing. Do you really believe in polite words? Rinpoche snorted with a straight face. Don't you have any shame? Her Majesty never says polite words. Du Laolu rolled his eyes. What can these things you make be used for? To fetch water? Rinpoche sneered. Didn't you hear what the other officials said? The faces of all the students, including Tong Lan, darkened when they heard this. The steam engine, which they had painstakingly learned for a long time and spent more than a month to make, was belittled as a toy. No one could accept it. Unwilling? You want to be praised and admired? You want to show them how powerful you are? Do you really want them to think that what you're doing is amazing? Do you want to achieve this? Rinpoche looked at everyone. Yes. Someone said in a scattered voice. Me too. After all, you are my students. What you have learned is what I have imparted to you. If you are being looked down upon, it means that I am being looked down upon as well, Rinpoche said unhurriedly. The knowledge of the steam engine is just the beginning. It represents a new power source. The next step is to transform the steam engine into something else, such as the train that I mentioned before. A train can pull hundreds of thousands of tons of goods. Furthermore, its speed was at least 3 times that of a horse carriage. As long as you can make something like this, no one will dare to look down on you. After Rinpoche finished speaking, everyone started to use their fingers to calculate how many tons were. Thanks to Rinpoche's mathematics class, these students could finally understand addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. However, they were shocked when they were done with the calculations. 1 ton of goods was 2,000 jin, so 1,000 tons of goods was 2 million jin. The load of a horse carriage was usually 3,000 to 5,000 jin. In other words, the train that Rinpoche mentioned could at least carry hundreds of horse carriages. More importantly, hundreds of horse carriages would consume a lot of rations. This was because the grass in some places wasn't suitable for livestock to eat and would cause stomach problems. Ordinary weeds could only prevent livestock from starving to death, but they lacked strength. Otherwise, the forkhorn cows wouldn't have the strength to carry goods for long distances. For example, baby ass. The aboriginals would often break baby ass into pieces and mix them with fine grass for the forkhorn cows to eat. Therefore, when hundreds of horse carriages carried goods, there would be at least a dozen horse carriages carrying fodder and other things. A train could save this trouble. Many students had a better understanding of the function of neatness through the production of the steam engine. If they made a train, the ministers that came today would definitely change their opinions. After all, these students were still children. After being instigated by Rinpoche, they quickly became enemies. Even Tong Lan gritted her teeth and prepared to teach Tong Jingye a lesson. Go back and think about how to improve this steam engine. I can give you some hints on connecting rods, changing the direction of the force and flywheels, Rinpoche said. You can also go and ask Teacher Gauda. Should know. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he strolled away. The rest of the students ran to ask Gauda about the train. Half a day later, a cry of alarm came from the room. Tong Lan, you broke Teacher Gauda. I just wanted to take a look. Who knew that I would dismantle it? What's inside? Don't pull me. I can just install it later. There's really no one inside. I've been wondering if there's a person or something else hiding inside. Du Laoyou's exclamation could be heard. Are you stupid? This is obviously lifeless. However, it's really strange that it can speak without any life. Ah, Shirgan, you broke another piece. Tonglan was the one who broke it. Since it's already broken, I might as well study it. Yagüe will kill all of you tomorrow. I'll install it later. He doesn't know who did it, so keep your mouth shut. If anyone leaks the news, I'll let you know what a punching bag's fist looks like. Tonglan waved her small fist in the room and said fiercely, "We'll share blessings and misfortunes. Don't you know what kind of person Yagüe is? If this matter is leaked, you won't be able to escape either. Everyone will be out of luck." Shirgan was smarter than Tonglan and immediately pulled everyone into the war chariot. When Rinpochen came the next day, his face darkened as soon as he entered the room. He saw that the outer shell of Gouda had obviously been tampered with and then forcibly stuffed in. Rinpochen touched it and those pieces of outer shell fell off. All the mechanical parts inside were exposed, and some of the wiring had been pulled off and randomly tied in knots. Clang. Rinpochen wanted to see what they did to Gouda, but the moment he touched it, Gouda's arm fell off and almost hit his foot. Teacher broke Teacher Gouda. A little Lolita's cry of surprise came from outside the door. Tonglan stood at the door with her mouth slightly open and a shocked expression on her face. She was even pointing at Rinpochen. What happened? What happened? A group of people rushed to the door and stuck their heads out. Are you guys itching for a beating? Rinpochen put on a fake smile. This group of bastards even learned how to frame others? Speak, who did it? Whoosh. A group of people stretched out their fingers and pointed at him in unison. Rinpochen's face darkened. You guys won't shed tears until you see the coffin. Someone hang them on the flagpole. I'm going to shoot them for 50 minutes today. Chapter 591. Great Xia. Ever since they were defeated half a year ago, everyone in Great Xia was shaken. Even though they knew that the Aboriginals were good at fighting, they were still defeated by 50,000 soldiers after preparing for a long time. This was the first time in decades that the Aboriginals suffered such a huge defeat. Not to mention that the winged cavalry and Licentio's troops even plundered several cities within Great Xia's borders, causing a large region in the south to be in a state of panic. After the winged cavalry left, everyone in Great Xia felt an indescribable anger. Among the commoners, there was a surge of emotions, especially among the scholars. However, after half a year, de Xia did not take any action. This caused many people to be extremely disappointed, and they turned their attention to the imperial court. However, it wasn't that no one knew of the imperial court's current predicament, but even more people still directed their resentment towards the imperial court. After all, they had never been plundered by the barbarians in their hinterland. First, they suffered a great defeat. Then, the enemy troops ran amok in their territory, and they could do nothing about it. For the arrogant Great Xia, it was like rubbing their faces against the ground. Every day you say that this is not the right time. You can't even help me with such a small matter. You can't even come up with a solution. What use do I have for you? Emperor Xia's roar rang out in the Grand Xia's conference hall. The guards outside the hall subconsciously shrank their necks. Over the past half year, the Xia Emperor had often been enraged, and this had become the norm. Almost every few days, someone in the palace would be beaten to death for angering the Xia Emperor. At the same time, ever since he had coughed up blood and fainted twice, his physical condition had worsened. The Xia Emperor, who originally only had a few hundred hairs, now had more than half of his hair turned white. His face was haggard and his eyes were sunken in. Your Majesty, the imperial court is heavily taxed, and many places are already complaining about it. We can't increase taxes anymore. If they didn't raise taxes, it would be difficult to gather military rations and armaments. Moreover, the recruitment and training of new soldiers would take a long time. They wouldn't be able to move south for at least 2 years. Currently, the barbarians have the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation on the outside and Tianjin Basin on the inside. We won't be able to pacify the situation in a short period of time, so this is the best time for us to recuperate. After 2 years, we will be able to wipe them out in one fell swoop. An old man said calmly. He was already used to the emperor's frequent outbursts, so he was not afraid. He only sighed in his heart. The emperor, who could be considered valiant in the past, could not help but become like this as he grew older. Although outsiders did not know, but seeing the changes in the past 6 months, he felt that the emperor was becoming more and more muddle-headed. Fortunately, the crown prince was still valiant. After His Majesty passed away, the crown prince would be able to shoulder the overall situation. Looking at His Majesty's body, it would only take a few years. Wait. Every day you all say that you want to wait. How can I continue waiting? Do you think I don't know what the people are saying about me? And you, Prime Minister? Xia Bailong snorted heavily. His face had turned red and his eyes were bloodshot. Thinking of the news that had been sent back, he almost went crazy. Your Majesty, calm down first. It's not good for your body to be so angry. After vomiting blood twice and fainting, Xia Bailong had fainted a few more times during this half a year. Everyone had no choice but to take care of the emperor's body carefully. Many things were hidden from him, but how could they hide it from him? Especially the revenge against Dayo, which had become a thorn in his heart. Your Majesty, those are just people with ulterior motives. If you get angry you will fall into their trap, Qi Mingtang, who was known as the Prime Minister, said faintly. Xia Bailong snorted heavily again before saying, nowadays all sorts of monsters have emerged. Do they really think that Great Xia is doomed after just one defeat? Have you found out anything? Their organization is very strict. They caught some people and committed suicide by poisoning them. However, this subject has recently found some clues. After a few more days, we will most likely be able to find the person who is using these sinister tricks. Another middle-aged man said. This person's appearance was heroic, his face was white, and he had a long beard. He gave off a dignified feeling. I will give you another month. No matter what, you must find out who exactly is stirring up trouble, Xia Bailong said. Then he covered his head with his hands. After throwing a tantrum, he immediately felt a splitting headache. At this moment, in the palace, a eunuch was walking to a certain place. Seeing that there was no one around, he dashed into the woods and found a small cylinder from a hidden place. There was a square box tied to the cylinder. After tapping on the box a few times, a countdown appeared on it. After doing all this, he stuffed the cylinder and box back to their original places, walked out of the hidden place and went straight to the next place. Previously, it took him 2 months to send these things to the palace in batches and hide them in various places. Now it was finally time to use them. He didn't know what these strange things were used for. However, he knew that something earth-shattering would definitely happen 8 hours later. All along, his mission had been for this moment. At the thought of this, his eyes seemed to glow. There were 5 other eunuchs and maids who did the same thing as him. 4 hours later, 2 of them changed their clothes according to the prearranged route and left the palace while hiding under a cart that was transporting meat to the palace. An hour later, another 3 people left using different methods. Only the last person was a maid who didn't have an outstanding appearance, but her eyes were extremely bright. She was unforgettable. She sat quietly in the courtyard, waiting to witness everything that was about to happen. Qinglian, I'm afraid that you will be scolded if Her Highness discovers you like this. A maid who passed by reminded her immediately when she saw her. In this cruel palace, many people didn't want to see this maid, who didn't fight for anything and only did her own thing. Let her be scolded. Qinglian smiled and combed her hair. Her smile was exceptionally bright. You. That maid was dumbfounded. She didn't understand what was wrong with her. Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and leave. If you don't feel well, go back to your room and rest. If that person calls you, I will help you. Thank you, elder sister Ling Yu. Qinglian smiled again. However, I will be leaving in a while. So, it's better not to have anything to do with me. If someone asks, just tell them directly. Leave? Where can you go? You're not thinking of committing suicide, are you? Are you crazy? Her Highness treats you well. Although there isn't much freedom in the palace, you have enough to eat and wear, and the work isn't heavy. Why can't you get over it? That maid was shocked. Qinglian's smile froze. Did I say that I wanted to commit suicide? Aren't you imagining things too much? However, he still smiled and kindly reminded her, something big might happen in the palace in a while. Elder sister, you have to protect yourself. As he spoke, the cylinders hidden in secret places all over the palace suddenly exploded. Bang! Explosions sounded one after another. What's that sound? Someone go and take a look. At the same time, countless guards and maids rushed to the place where the explosion had just occurred. After running a few steps, they smelled a suffocating smell. One by one, they stood rooted to the ground and violently vomited as if they had been hit in the head by a sledgehammer. Some maids directly fell to the ground and fainted. This smell, which could only be found in the heavens and rarely in the mortal world, permeated the entire palace. Emperor Xia, who had just drunk a bowl of medicine and looked slightly better, was in his room when he heard the noise coming from outside. Before he could reprimand them, the smell entered the room through the window and into his nose. Chapter 592. Ah! Qing Lian screamed like a girl who had been molested, but she felt that she was in a worse state than being molested. However, she was rubbing her skin hard at this moment, wishing that she could rub off a layer of skin. Thinking of the encounter in the great Xia dynasty's palace that day, she felt that she was a complete tragedy. She wanted to see what would happen in the palace and see the chaos there, but when it happened she wished that she was never there. At that time she even suspected that she would die from the stench. Fortunately, the palace was also in chaos at that time, and she managed to escape. However, she tragically discovered that the stench on her body couldn't be washed away no matter how hard she tried. She was constantly smelling the stench on her body, which almost drove her crazy. Haha, I didn't expect that Xia Bailong would end up like this. He died from the stench? This way of dying is really strange. He is the only emperor of the great Xia dynasty, and his name will definitely go down in history. A man's laughter suddenly came from outside the courtyard, and his voice was extremely cheerful. Hearing that voice, her ears twitched and her face immediately turned pale. Sword. Qing Lian's face turned pale, and she grabbed her clothes to cover herself with one hand. She raised her other hand, and a white light pierced through the roof and fell into her hand. It was a 3-foot-long long sword. The blade was densely covered in fish scale-like patterns, and a red ribbon hung from the hilt. In the next second she turned into a white light and rushed out of the house, shouting in the air, "Su Qing, you bastard, give me your life!" Su Qing was shocked by her sword and quickly dodged. When the sword fell, everything in front of him was split into two. An old man next to him was shocked, and he stopped Qing Lian and said angrily, "What are you doing?" At this moment, Qing Lian's clothes were drenched by the water droplets on her body, and her hair was also wet. She looked like a beauty coming out of a bath. Although Qing Lian wasn't extremely beautiful, her eyes were extremely bright and spirited, and her temperament was outstanding. Although she looked angry, she was also extremely attractive. However, the old man and Su Qing smelled the stench that filled the air with her appearance, and their faces immediately turned green. "Don't stop me, I'm going to kill that bastard Su Qing. Why didn't you tell me?" Qing Lian gritted her teeth and drew her sword. "You can't blame me. Who would have thought that you wouldn't leave?" Su Qing ran off. It wasn't that he was afraid of Qing Lian, but the smell was simply too smelly. Even the old man subconsciously took 3 steps back. When Qing Lian saw their reactions, she became even angrier. She gritted her teeth and chased after Su Qing. After a long time, no one knew what Su Qing said, but Qing Lian let out a mournful cry and said, "Renbaqian, I won't let you off." Naturally, Renbaqian didn't know that he was being targeted. At this moment he was looking at Zhang Junjing with a kind face. "How is it? Is the name list ready?" "Sir Ren, it's done." At this moment, Zhang Junjing had a calm and smiling expression on his face. It seemed like he had thought things through. With both hands, he respectfully handed over a stack of paper that was filled with words. In fact, he had already thought it through. Since they wanted to take root in Deyo, it wouldn't be a bad thing for them to take advantage of Renbaqian. Since the Zhang family lost to Renbaqian in a few areas that they were extremely good at, then Renbaqian did indeed have some outstanding aspects. Furthermore, Renbaqian won these 3 competitions, causing a stir in the Zhang family. Many people quarreled endlessly over this matter. In particular, many of the old craftsmen in the Zhang family were in disbelief and wanted to see how good Renbaqian was. For these old craftsmen, a skill was more attractive than anything else, especially when it surpassed them in a few areas that the Jianghu family was extremely good at. This made many of the old craftsmen want to see what kind of person Renbaqian was. Among them, even Zhang Junjing had to address the person with the highest status as uncle. His status in the family was even higher than Zhang Junjing's. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Junjing was relieved and handed over the name list. As for how many of the names on the list represented in the Zhang family, only a few people in the Zhang family knew. Renbaqian took the paper and looked at it. He saw that it was densely packed with small words. At a glance he could tell that there were quite a lot of them. "How many people are there?" Renbaqian raised his head and asked. "Sir Ren, the Zhang family has a total of more than 5,900 people, and their names are all on this list." Zhang Junjing cupped his fists. How many craftsmen are there? There are more than 3,400 craftsmen and 2,000 people in other jobs. Not only that, but many of the elders in the family also have disciples who aren't related by blood. Although these disciples aren't on the list, they can also serve Dayo if the opportunity is right. The number of these disciples isn't less than the number of craftsmen, Zhang Junjing answered. Rinpoche looked down at the thick stack of paper in his hand again. There were 3,400 craftsmen. Including those disciples, there were at least 7,000 to 8,000 people. For the impoverished Dayo, 7,000 to 8,000 craftsmen could be said to be a huge sum of money. If he had 7,000 to 8,000 skilled craftsmen under him, many things would be much easier to do. Sir, our Zhang family has a big business and it won't be easy to leave the Yin nation, Zhang Junjing said again. Rinpoche nodded. After all, there were so many people and many of them were famous craftsmen. It wouldn't be easy for all of them to run away at once. However, it didn't matter because the Yun nation wouldn't exist in the future. This was due to the lack of talents in Dayo, as well as the Aboriginals' lack of ambition and their habit of snatching without occupying. Up until now, they still hadn't realized that the Aboriginals weren't just going to snatch the Yun nation, but to swallow the entire Yun nation. What other requests do you have? Rinpoche asked after thinking for a while. I want you to give our Zhang family a future, Zhang Junki immediately said solemnly. This was the most important thing. Don't worry, Rinpoche said faintly. As long as your Zhang family does a good job, I can guarantee that you will have a place in the future. Thank you very much, sir. Zhang Junjing cupped his hands. Your Zhang family members don't have to withdraw in a hurry. Those who are still in the cities that have been conquered can withdraw first. I will give you a token and they can travel with it without any trouble. Protector Z from the Protectorate of the Northeast will also arrange for people to escort them. As for the rest, stay where you are and wait for my news, Rinpoche said. However, in the chaos of war, it's inevitable that there will be casualties. I will take care of this matter. You can rest assured. After sending Zhang Junjing off, Rinpoche called for Zhuoleng and gave him the stack of papers. He asked Zhuoleng to find someone to copy it and then send someone to investigate. With the Jing tribe, it would be much easier to investigate in the Yun nation. Rinpoche then looked for the Empress and suggested that Zidonglai send more prisoners of war back to open mines and repair roads. He had mentioned this before, but Zidonglai wasn't in the mood to do so due to the urgency of the war at the front line. Now that Zidonglai had conquered nearly 10 cities in the Yun nation, it was time to raise the issue. It was always right to build roads if one wanted to get rich. In addition, there were various materials from the Yun nation that Dayo lacked. This included, but wasn't limited to, various metals such as iron and aluminum. For this reason, Rinpoche proposed to mobilize militias from the various cities to the Yun nation and transport all kinds of looted materials back to replenish Dayo. After their discussion, the Empress held a meeting with the ministers the next day and gave Zidonglai an order. Soon after, the Aboriginals' offensive at the front line began to change. In the past they mainly killed, but later on they started to leave some alive. Although they often couldn't hold back and only a few people survived after a battle, this was a signal. At the same time, the various cities in Dayo began to transmit information. Batches of militias were issued with weapons, walked out of the cities and gathered in the northeast. At this time, Rinpoche received an extremely incredible piece of news. The Emperor of Great Xia Baichong had actually died from the stench. The news was sent by Su Qin. After reading this secret letter, Rinpoche's expression suddenly became extremely strange. He then delivered this secret letter to the Empress, who was also dumbfounded after reading it. Rinpoche, on the other hand, carefully admired this rare expression of the Empress. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.